psychology experiments often begin with something very small. A choice between two buttons. A word flashed on a screen. A stranger walking into a room. At first, these moments seem ordinary, almost forgettable, but quietly beneath the surface, they reveal something unsettling and strangely beautiful about the human mind. Tonight, we are going to explore some of the most complex psychology experiments ever designed, not in a rushed or clinical way, but slowly, gently, and reflectively. Each experiment will open a small window into perception, memory, obedience, attention, fear, identity, and the hidden systems that guide thought. These are not only studies about other people, they are also studies about us. What makes psychology so fascinating is that it often shows us something we would rather not notice, that our choices are not always fully our own, that memory can bend, that confidence can be false, that the mind can be influenced by timing, language, framing, and expectation in ways so subtle that we rarely detect them in daily life. And yet, there is something calming about seeing this clearly, because once hidden patterns are revealed, confusion begins to soften. What once felt random becomes structured. What once felt mysterious becomes quietly understandable. As you listen, you do not need to memorize every name, theory, or detail. Just let the ideas pass through your mind gently, like distant lights moving across a dark landscape. Some experiments may feel surprising. Some may feel eerie. Some may leave you wondering how much of your inner world is truly self-created. Take a moment to settle in. Tonight is not about overstimulation. It is about slow understanding. A calm journey through the architecture of the human mind, and perhaps somewhere in the quiet, a deeper way of thinking will begin to emerge. Memory often feels solid. It feels like a private archive, carefully storing the events of our lives and returning them to us when needed. We tend to imagine memory as something like a recording, a quiet internal camera preserving conversations, faces, emotions, and places exactly as they happened. But psychology has shown us something far stranger. Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Each time we remember something, we are not simply retrieving a fixed file from the past. We are rebuilding the experience in the present, piece by piece, often without realizing how much of that reconstruction is influenced by suggestion, emotion, expectation, and time. This is one of the most unsettling and fascinating discoveries in modern psychology. Take a moment to imagine a memory from childhood. Perhaps a room in an old house, a birthday cake, a hallway, a particular smell in the air. It may feel vivid. It may even feel unquestionably real. But if psychology has taught us anything, it is that vividness and truth are not always the same thing. A memory can feel deeply certain and still contain distortions, omissions, or details that were never there at all. One of the most famous lines of research on this idea came from experiments involving eyewitness memory. Participants would watch a short film or sequence of events, often involving something simple like a car accident, a theft, or an argument. Later, they would be asked questions about what they saw. At first, this sounds straightforward, but the wording of the questions changed everything. If participants were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other, they gave one estimate. But if they were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, their answers became noticeably higher. A single word quietly altered the remembered intensity of the event. Even more strangely, people later reported details that were never shown at all. Broken glass, for example, was often remembered even when none had appeared in the original footage. The mind had filled in what seemed to fit the emotional tone of the event. This is one of the quiet powers of suggestion. A memory does not simply store facts. It absorbs meaning, implication, and emotional framing. Language enters the memory like a soft current entering still water, subtly changing its shape. Take a moment to reflect on that. Not only can we forget, we can also remember too much, or rather we can remember what was never truly there. This leads us into one of the most haunting areas of psychology, false memory. A false memory is not a lie. It is not deliberate invention. It is a genuine experience of remembering something that did not happen or did not happen in the way it is recalled. And what makes false memory so fascinating is how easily it can emerge under the right conditions. In one remarkable set of experiments, participants were told several stories from their childhood. Most were true, supplied by family members. But one of the stories was fictional. It described a childhood event that had never happened, such as getting lost in a shopping mall and later being helped by an older stranger. After repeated interviews and gentle prompting, many participants began to remember the false event, not vaguely, but vividly. They described what they wore, how they felt, what the stranger looked like, and where they thought it happened. The memory had become real to them. Pause for a moment and imagine how delicate this makes the human mind feel. A simple suggestion, repeated gently over time, can become part of a person's personal history. The boundary between imagination and memory is not a hard wall. It is more like a misty border, crossed more easily than we would like to believe. This does not mean memory is useless or broken. It means memory is alive. It is flexible, adaptive, and deeply connected to the meaning-making nature of consciousness. We do not merely preserve the past. We interpret it. We organize it into stories. We make it coherent. And in doing so, we sometimes trade precision for emotional or narrative sense. Another fascinating experiment explored this through word lists. Participants were shown a list of related words such as bed, dream, pillow, night, blanket, rest, and tired. Afterward, they were asked to recall as many words as possible. Many confidently remembered the word sleep, even though it had never appeared. Why? Because the mind naturally groups ideas by association. It builds invisible networks of meaning. When enough related concepts are activated, the central idea begins to feel as though it was present too. The memory system does not simply store isolated pieces, it weaves them into patterns. This is efficient, but it is not always accurate. And perhaps there is something quietly beautiful in that. The mind is not a machine designed only to preserve detail. It is a living structure designed to create understanding. It searches for coherence, rhythm, and relationship. Even when it gets things wrong, it is often trying to make the world feel more intelligible. Memory illusions also reveal something important about confidence. We often assume that certainty means truth. If someone recalls something clearly and emotionally, we tend to believe them. If we ourselves feel sure about a memory, we rarely question it. But confidence and accuracy are not the same. This is one of the most important and humbling lessons psychology offers. A person can be completely sincere and still be mistaken. A memory can feel bright, detailed, and emotionally charged while remaining partially or entirely false. This has profound implications. It affects eyewitness testimony, legal systems, therapy, relationships, and even identity itself. Because much of who we think we are depends on what we believe happened to us. If memory is fluid, then identity is, in some quiet sense, fluid too. Take a moment to imagine your life as a long corridor of remembered moments. Some doors are clear, some are dim, some are locked, and some may open into rooms that were rearranged long ago without your noticing. This is not necessarily frightening. It can also be freeing. Because if memory is reconstructive, then understanding ourselves requires gentleness. It asks us not to cling too tightly to every recollection as final and absolute. It encourages humility, reflection, patience. Another subtle aspect of memory illusion involves emotion. Emotion can sharpen memory, but it can also distort it. People often remember highly emotional events with great confidence. They may remember exactly where they were, what they felt, what they heard, what the sky looked like. And yet, when psychologists compare those memories over time, they often shift. The emotional core remains, but the details drift. This suggests that what the mind preserves most strongly is not always factual precision, but significance. The memory holds on to what mattered, even if the edges become blurred. In this way, memory behaves almost like a dream, not because it is unreal, but because it is selective, symbolic, and shaped by feeling. It keeps the emotional architecture even when the furniture changes. And perhaps this is why memory feels so intimate. It is not just a storehouse of information, It is part of how we make life meaningful. Imagine now a quiet library at night, shelves stretching into darkness, some books complete, some rewritten, some missing pages, some containing notes added years later in handwriting you no longer recognize. That is memory. Not a cold archive, but a living library. Not perfect, but deeply human. The experiments on memory illusions do not simply tell us that the mind makes mistakes. They tell us something more profound. They show us that the mind is always interpreting, always shaping, always shaping to create order from experience. And that hidden process is happening constantly, even now. Attention feels simple. It feels like the act of looking at something, noticing it, and understanding it. We often assume that if our eyes are open and our mind is alert, then we are taking in the world more or less as it is. A room appears before us. Sounds enter. Movement is noticed. Objects are recognized. It all seems immediate and complete. But psychology reveals something much quieter and more unsettling. We do not perceive everything around us. We perceive only a carefully filtered fraction. Selective attention is the mind's ability to focus on certain pieces of information while ignoring others. Without it, consciousness would be overwhelmed by the endless flood of sights, sounds, textures, memories, and thoughts competing for space every second. Attention protects us from overload. It gives order to experience. And yet, in doing so, it also blinds us. Take a moment to imagine standing in a crowded train station. People are moving in every direction. Announcements echo overhead. Shoes tap against the floor. A suitcase wheel rattles in the distance. A child laughs. A phone vibrates. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs softly. At first, this sounds chaotic. But your mind does something remarkable. It selects. It chooses what matters most in that moment. Perhaps the arrival board. Perhaps a familiar face. Perhaps the sound of your own name being called from across the room. Everything else fades gently into the background. This filtering process is so constant, so natural that we almost never notice it happening. But psychology experiments have shown that what we ignore can be far more significant than we expect. One of the most famous demonstrations of selective attention is sometimes called inattentional blindness. Participants are asked to watch a short video and count how many times a group of people passes a ball back and forth. The task is simple, but it requires focus. Most people become absorbed in counting, watching carefully, trying not to lose track. And then something extraordinary happens. In the middle of the scene, a person in a gorilla suit walks slowly through the frame, pauses, faces the camera, and then walks away. And many people never see it. Not because it was hidden, not because it moved too quickly, not because the screen was unclear. They do not see it because their attention was elsewhere. This experiment feels almost impossible the first time you hear about it. How could something so obvious go unnoticed? But this is the quiet power of selective attention. The mind is not simply taking in the whole world and then deciding what is important. It is constructing a version of reality based on what it expects to need. What is not selected can become nearly invisible. Take a moment to reflect on that. How much of daily life might pass by unnoticed, not because it was absent, but because your attention had already chosen another path. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is part of its design. Selective attention allows us to read in noisy rooms, drive through traffic, follow conversations, and complete tasks without collapsing under sensory overload. It is one of the reasons thought feels coherent rather than chaotic. But coherence comes at a cost. One of the earliest psychology experiments on attention explored this through listening tasks. Participants wore headphones and heard different streams of spoken information in each ear. They were instructed to focus on only one stream and repeat it aloud while ignoring the other. This is called shadowing. What researchers discovered was deeply fascinating. People could often repeat the attended message quite well, but they remembered very little from the ignored stream. They might notice whether the ignored voice was male or female, or whether it changed volume, but they usually failed to notice the actual content. In other words, unattended information was not fully processed in the same way. It passed by like distant scenery outside a moving train, and yet sometimes something still slipped through. A person's own name, for example, often broke through the barrier of inattention. Even when spoken in the ignored stream, it could suddenly capture awareness. This is known as the cocktail party effect, named after the experience of hearing your name from across a crowded room while engaged in another conversation. Why does this happen? Because attention is not only guided by conscious choice, it is also guided by personal relevance. The mind is quietly scanning the background, not in full detail, but enough to detect certain signals that matter deeply to us. This suggests that attention is not a fixed spotlight. It is more like a living system of priorities. Some things are let in because we choose them. Others enter because they carry emotional weight, danger, novelty, or personal meaning. Imagine your mind as a quiet gatekeeper standing at the entrance to consciousness. Every second, thousands of impressions approach. Voices, colors, motions, ideas, memories, sensations. The gatekeeper cannot allow everything through, so it makes choices. Most impressions are gently turned away. A few are allowed to enter and become part of your experienced world. That is attention, and what a strange thought that is. Reality may feel immediate and complete, but much of it is being filtered before you ever become aware of it. Selective attention also helps explain why people can miss obvious changes in their environment. This is known as change blindness. In these experiments, participants view a scene, and then after a brief interruption, a significant detail is altered. A building disappears. A person's shirt changes color. A large object vanishes from the room. Surprisingly often, people do not notice, not because they are careless, but because attention was not directed toward the changing detail at the right moment. The world feels stable and continuous, but our perception of it is stitched together from selective snapshots. This is a profoundly humbling realization. We often think we are seeing everything, but in truth, we are seeing enough to create the feeling of everything. That distinction matters. It means perception is not passive. It is active, economical, and deeply shaped by goals. This has implications far beyond laboratory experiments. It affects relationships, learning, media, politics, memory, and even self-awareness. We notice what confirms our interests. We overlook what seems irrelevant. We focus on threats when anxious. We miss beauty when preoccupied. Attention shapes not only what we know, it shapes the very world we feel we inhabit. Take a moment to imagine two people walking through the same city street. One is anxious and notices every possible danger. A dark alley, a stranger's expression, the sound of footsteps behind them. The other is in love and notices something entirely different. Warm light in the windows, music drifting from a cafe, the color of the evening sky. The street is the same, but attention has quietly created two different realities. This is one of the most philosophical dimensions of selective attention. It reminds us that experience is never just the world itself. It is the world as filtered through a mind with limits, needs, memories, and desires. And perhaps there is something calming in that realization. Because if attention shapes experience, then gently training attention may also reshape life. This is why practices like mindfulness feel so powerful. They do not necessarily change the world outside us. They change what the gatekeeper allows us to notice. A breath, a sensation, a small sound, a passing thought, the texture of the present moment. What was once overlooked becomes visible. In this way, selective attention is not only a cognitive limitation, it is also a quiet source of possibility. Where attention goes, reality deepens. Another fascinating aspect of attention is that it can be captured against our will. Sudden movement, loud sounds, emotional words, or signs of danger can all seize awareness instantly. This is adaptive. It helps us survive, but it also means our attention can be manipulated. Advertisements exploit this. News headlines exploit this. Social media exploits this. Bright colors, emotional triggers, novelty, outrage, urgency. These things bypass deliberate focus and pull the mind toward them automatically. In a world designed to compete for awareness, attention becomes one of the most valuable and vulnerable parts of human life. To protect your attention, then, is not merely to improve concentration, it is to protect the shape of your inner world. Confidence feels persuasive. When someone speaks clearly, answers quickly, and appears certain, we naturally assume they know what they are talking about. Confidence carries a strange authority. It calms uncertainty, fills silence, and gives the impression of stability. In conversation, in classrooms, in politics, in media, and even in our private thoughts, certainty often feels like intelligence. But psychology has revealed a more complicated truth. Confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. In fact, some of the most fascinating experiments in psychology show that people can feel deeply certain while being quietly, completely wrong. And perhaps even more unsettling, the people who know the least are sometimes the most convinced that they know enough. Take a moment to imagine being asked a difficult question. Why do seasons happen? How does a zipper really work? What causes a rainbow? How does a toilet flush? How does a government bond function? At first, many of these seem familiar. We have seen them, used them, heard about them, perhaps even spoken confidently about them. But if we were asked to explain them step by step, in calm detail, something surprising often happens. The certainty begins to fade. This is one of the gentle but powerful discoveries of cognitive psychology. We often mistake familiarity for understanding. Because something feels known, we assume it is understood. But recognition is not the same as explanation. This illusion has been studied in what researchers sometimes call the illusion of explanatory depth. Participants are asked how well they understand ordinary systems or concepts. Before explanation, they often rate their understanding quite highly. But once they are asked to explain how the thing actually works, their self-assessment drops sharply. The mind had confused the feeling of knowing with knowledge itself, and this happens far more often than most people realize. Pause for a moment and notice how subtle this is. You do not need to be careless or unintelligent to experience false confidence. In fact, it often emerges precisely because the mind is trying to create a coherent and manageable picture of reality. It wants to feel oriented. It wants to reduce uncertainty. Confidence, in that sense, can be psychologically soothing, even when it is not fully earned. This leads us into one of the most widely discussed ideas in modern psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This effect describes a pattern in which people with lower ability in a particular area often overestimate their competence, while those with greater skill are sometimes more cautious in judging themselves. The reason is surprisingly elegant. To recognize expertise, one usually needs some of the very skills that expertise requires. In other words, the knowledge needed to perform well is often also the knowledge needed to evaluate performance accurately. Without that knowledge, mistakes can remain invisible. Imagine trying to navigate a dense forest without a map. If you are deeply lost, you may not even know that you are lost. Every direction can feel plausible. Every wrong turn can feel correct. That is the quiet danger of false confidence. It does not usually announce itself as arrogance. Often it feels like normal certainty, and because certainty feels good, it is rarely questioned. Psychology experiments on false confidence often reveal something almost poetic. People are not simply wrong. They are wrong in ways that feel internally stable. The mind constructs a smooth surface over gaps in understanding, allowing us to move through life with a sense of continuity and control. This can be useful. If we doubted every thought, every memory, and every judgment, daily life would become exhausting. Some confidence is necessary for action. We need enough trust in our own perceptions and decisions to function. But when confidence detaches too far from reality, it becomes dangerous. One fascinating area of research explores overconfidence in memory. Participants are shown lists of words, scenes, or faces, and later asked whether they remember them. Sometimes they not only make errors, but express those errors with high confidence. They do not merely guess. They feel sure. This is deeply important because confidence is often used as a social signal of truth. In courtrooms, classrooms, meetings, and relationships, certainty can persuade others even when it is unsupported. A person who hesitates may be correct. A person who speaks firmly may be mistaken. And yet, the human mind is often drawn to firmness. Why? Because certainty reduces discomfort, ambiguity is tiring, complexity is tiring, not knowing is tiring. Confidence offers relief. It wraps uncertainty in a neat shape and presents it as settled. In this way, false confidence can be understood not only as a cognitive error, but as a quiet emotional strategy. Take a moment to reflect on how often this appears in everyday life. Someone confidently explains nutrition while misunderstanding biology. Someone speaks with certainty about economics after reading a headline. Someone gives relationship advice with no self-awareness at all. And perhaps at times we do the same. This is not a moral failure. It is a feature of being human. The mind often values coherence more than precision. Another fascinating experiment asked participants to answer general knowledge questions and then estimate how likely it was that each answer was correct. Again and again, people showed a pattern of overconfidence. They were more certain than accuracy justified. What is especially interesting is that overconfidence tends to increase in areas where we know just enough to feel fluent, but not enough to recognize complexity. A little knowledge can create a very convincing illusion of mastery. This may be one of the reasons modern information environments feel so psychologically strange. We are constantly exposed to fragments of expertise, short videos, headlines, simplified explanations, surface-level summaries. These can be genuinely useful, but they can also create a false sense of comprehension. We begin to feel informed without being deeply informed. And because the information is easy to consume, it feels even more trustworthy. False confidence also appears in prediction. People are often far more certain about future events than the evidence warrants. They believe they can anticipate outcomes, understand trends, or foresee consequences with much greater clarity than reality allows. This is especially common after events have already happened. Once something occurs, it often feels as though it should have been obvious all along. This is known as hindsight bias. The past begins to look more predictable than it truly was. We rewrite uncertainty into inevitability, and from that rewritten past, false confidence grows. We tell ourselves we knew it all along. We quietly edit memory to preserve a sense of competence. Again, the mind is not necessarily trying to deceive. It is trying to preserve a coherent self-image, a world in which our judgments make sense. A life in which we feel oriented rather than confused. Imagine now a person walking through a dimly lit museum at night. They carry a small flashlight. Wherever the beam lands, things appear clear and solid, but beyond the beam, the room remains in shadow. False confidence is often the mistake of assuming the flashlight reveals the whole museum. It does not. It reveals only a narrow circle of temporary clarity. This is why intellectual humility is so powerful. Not because it means doubting everything, but because it means remembering that the beam is limited. That certainty should be held gently. That understanding often deepens not through louder conviction, but through quieter curiosity. Some of the wisest thinkers in history have shared this trait. Not constant hesitation, but an awareness of complexity. A willingness to revise. A calm relationship with uncertainty. Psychology suggests that this is not weakness. It may actually be a higher form of cognition. To say I might be wrong is not always a lack of confidence. Sometimes it is evidence of a mind that sees more layers. Take a moment to consider how different the world might feel if people valued accuracy more than certainty. If conversation allowed for nuance. If questions were not rushed into answers. If confidence had to earn its place more slowly. There is something deeply calming in that possibility, because false confidence creates noise. But genuine understanding tends to move quietly. The mind prefers harmony. It prefers for beliefs, actions, memories, and values to fit together in a way that feels stable and coherent. We like to think of ourselves as reasonable, consistent, and aligned with our own principles. If we believe something is important, we expect our behavior to reflect it. If we make a decision, we prefer to feel it was the right one. But psychology reveals a quieter and more uncomfortable truth. The mind is often forced to live with contradiction, and when contradiction appears, it creates tension. This tension is known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the uneasy psychological discomfort that arises when two thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors do not fit together. It is what happens when a person values honesty but lies, values health but continues a destructive habit, or believes they are rational while making an emotional decision they cannot fully explain. At first, this may sound obvious. Of course, contradiction feels uncomfortable. But what makes cognitive dissonance so fascinating is not merely that contradiction exists. It is how far the mind will go to reduce that discomfort without necessarily changing the truth. Take a moment to imagine buying something expensive. Perhaps a phone, a car, or a course you're unsure about. At first, you feel uncertain, maybe even regretful. But after the purchase, your mind begins to shift. You start noticing reasons why it was worth it. You focus on the features, you emphasize the benefits, you quietly downplay the flaws. This is not always deliberate. It often happens beneath awareness. Once a choice has been made, the mind begins protecting it, not because the decision was objectively perfect, but because internal conflict is mentally costly. The mind would rather adjust its interpretation than remain in tension. This is the quiet engine of cognitive dissonance. One of the most famous experiments in psychology explored this with a deceptively simple task. Participants were asked to perform an extremely boring activity, something repetitive and meaningless. Afterward, some participants were paid a small amount of money to tell the next participant that the task had actually been enjoyable. Others were paid a much larger amount. At first, one might expect that the larger payment would create more positive feelings. But something more subtle happened. The participants paid only a small amount later reported that they genuinely enjoyed the task more than those who were paid a larger amount. Why? Because the people paid a large amount had an obvious explanation for their behavior. They could think, I said it was fun because I was paid well. Their internal contradiction was easily resolved. But the people paid only a small amount did not have enough external justification. Their mind had to find another way to reduce the discomfort. So it quietly changed the internal story. I must have actually liked it. This is one of the most elegant and eerie findings in psychology. Sometimes we do not change our actions to fit our beliefs. We change our beliefs to fit our actions. Take a moment to reflect on how often this might happen in ordinary life. A person stays in a harmful job and begins convincing themselves it is meaningful. A person enters a bad relationship and calls the suffering growth. A person defends a belief they inherited, not because it is fully examined, but because questioning it would unravel too much. Cognitive dissonance is not just about isolated mistakes. It is deeply connected to identity. When a belief is tied to who we think we are, changing that belief can feel like a threat to the self. And so the mind resists. It rationalizes. It softens contradictions. It edits meaning. Not because it is malicious, but because coherence feels safe. Imagine your mind as a quiet room with paintings hanging on every wall. Each painting represents a belief, a memory, a decision, or a value. Most of the time, the paintings seem to fit together, but then one day, a new painting arrives that clashes with the rest. Its colors are wrong, its shape does not belong. Its presence disturbs the balance of the room. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort of standing in that room, and the mind will often do almost anything to restore visual harmony. It may move the new painting. It may reinterpret the old ones. It may dim the lights. It may even pretend the conflict is not there at all. This is why people can hold remarkably contradictory beliefs while feeling psychologically stable. Contradictions do not always vanish. They are often managed through subtle mental adjustments. Another powerful example of cognitive dissonance appears in effort justification. When people work very hard, suffer, or sacrifice for something, they often come to value it more, even if the thing itself is not especially rewarding. This helps explain why difficult initiations, exhausting systems, and painful commitments can feel meaningful. If the cost was high, the mind begins to conclude that the reward must also be high. Otherwise, the pain would feel senseless. This has implications for education, organizations, ideology, relationships, and even personal ambition. Sometimes we become attached to something not because it is good, but because we paid too much to let it feel meaningless. There is something quietly tragic and deeply human in that. The mind would rather preserve purpose than confront waste. Cognitive dissonance also helps explain why changing someone's mind is often so difficult. Facts alone are rarely enough, especially when those facts threaten identity, belonging, or past decisions. Information is not entering an empty space, it is entering a structured internal world that is trying to remain stable. This is why argument so often fails. When people feel attacked, they do not calmly update. They defend. They reinterpret. They protect the architecture of the self. This does not mean change is impossible, but it suggests that genuine change usually requires psychological safety, time, and reflection. A person must feel able to loosen one belief without losing their entire sense of self. That is a very delicate process. Take a moment to consider how much of human history may be shaped by this one quiet force. Entire institutions defending contradictions, cultures preserving rituals no one fully questions, individuals justifying harmful systems because acknowledging the truth would demand too much change. Cognitive dissonance is not merely personal, it is social, political, historical, and perhaps most importantly, it is universal. No one is outside it. The intelligent mind is not immune. The educated mind is not immune. The reflective mind is not immune. In fact, more intelligent people can sometimes become even better at rationalization because they possess more sophisticated tools for explaining away contradiction. That may be one of the most humbling insights psychology offers. Intelligence does not automatically produce honesty. Sometimes it simply produces more elegant self-deception. And yet, there is something hopeful here too. Because once cognitive dissonance is understood, it can become visible. Not always immediately, but gradually. A strange defensiveness, a discomfort around certain questions, a tendency to justify too quickly, a refusal to examine what feels threatening. These can all become gentle signals, not reasons for shame, but invitations to pause, to ask quietly and honestly, what am I protecting right now? That question alone can be transformative, because beneath many rigid opinions or defensive reactions lies something softer. A fear of wasted time, a fear of being wrong, a fear of losing identity, a fear of meaning collapsing. And when those fears are met calmly rather than denied, the mind can begin to loosen. Imagine now a still lake at night. On the surface, everything appears smooth, but beneath the surface, currents move in different directions. Cognitive dissonance is one of those hidden currents. It shapes behavior, belief, and perception without always announcing itself. It bends thought quietly, restoring inner balance even when the balance is built on distortion. Helplessness can begin quietly, not always with one dramatic failure, but with repetition. A series of moments in which effort does not seem to matter. A hand reaching toward change and finding no response. A voice speaking and not being heard. A mind trying again and again until eventually it begins to stop trying at all. This is the unsettling heart of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a psychological condition in which a person begins to believe that their actions no longer influence outcomes, even when change is still possible. It is not simply sadness, laziness, or weakness. It is a learned expectation, a quiet internal conclusion that says, "Nothing I do will make a difference." And once that belief settles in, it can shape behavior with extraordinary force. Take a moment to imagine standing in front of a locked door. The first time you push. The second time you try the handle again. The third time you knock. After enough failed attempts, something subtle begins to happen. Eventually, you may stop checking. And the strange part is this: even if the door is later unlocked, you may still walk past it as though it remains closed. That is learned helplessness. one of the most influential lines of research in psychology, explored this idea through controlled experiments involving unavoidable negative experiences. The details of those early studies are ethically difficult by modern standards, but the core finding was powerful. When living beings repeatedly experienced unpleasant events they could not escape or control, they often stopped attempting escape later, even when escape became possible. This revealed something profound. It is not only pain or difficulty that shapes behavior, it is perceived control. When the mind begins to believe that effort is disconnected from outcome, motivation weakens, curiosity fades, action slows. The world starts to feel less like a field of possibility and more like a closed system. And perhaps one of the most haunting things about learned helplessness is that it can look like passivity from the outside while feeling like exhaustion from the inside. A person may appear unmotivated, but beneath that stillness may be a long history of invisible failed attempts. This is why the concept matters so deeply in understanding depression, trauma, education, work, and even everyday habits. Learned helplessness is not only a laboratory phenomenon, it can quietly emerge in ordinary life. Consider a student who studies hard and still fails repeatedly. At first, they may ask questions, seek help, stay hopeful, but after enough disappointing outcomes, they may begin to think, maybe I'm just bad at this. The focus shifts from the task to the self. What was once "this method isn't working" becomes "I am the kind of person for whom effort does not work." That shift is psychologically devastating, because once helplessness becomes part of identity, it is no longer just about one subject, one situation, or one setback. It becomes a lens through which reality is interpreted. Another person may remain in the painful relationship, not because they want to suffer, but because repeated attempts to improve things have led nowhere. Over time, they may stop believing change is possible. A worker in a rigid system may stop offering ideas. A child constantly ignored may stop asking. A person repeatedly dismissed may stop speaking with confidence, not because they have nothing to say, but because the mind has quietly learned that expression leads nowhere. Take a moment to reflect on how heavy that must feel. To live inside a world where doors might exist, but your mind no longer expects them to open. This is where learned helplessness becomes more than a theory. It becomes existential. Because agency, the sense that one can act meaningfully in the world, is one of the foundations of psychological life. Without agency, time becomes flatter. Possibility narrows. The future begins to feel like a repetition rather than an opening. And yet, what makes learned helplessness so psychologically complex is that it is often rational in origin. If the environment repeatedly teaches that effort does not matter, then the mind is not behaving irrationally by giving up. In a strange way, it is adapting. It is conserving energy, protecting itself from further disappointment, reducing pain by reducing expectation. The tragedy is that this adaptation can outlive the conditions that created it. Imagine a bird kept for years in a small enclosure. Even after the enclosure is opened, it may hesitate to fly, not because it cannot, but because its world has been mentally reduced. That is the quiet power of psychological learning. The mind does not only respond to what is happening now, it responds to what is happening to expect. This is why learned helplessness is often linked to explanatory style, the way people explain setbacks to themselves. Some people experience difficulty and think, this is temporary, this is specific, I can adjust. Others begin to think, this always happens, it affects everything, it is because of who I am. These internal explanations matter enormously, because the mind is always building a theory of reality, and if the theory becomes nothing I do matters, then even opportunities for change can become invisible. Psychology experiments have repeatedly shown that expectation shapes action. When people believe they have no control, they often stop testing the boundaries of their environment. They do less. They try less. They notice fewer alternatives. Their behavior begins to confirm the very helplessness they fear. This creates a painful loop. The less they act, the less changes. The less changes, the more helplessness feels true. and so stillness begins to harden into identity. But there is another side to this story, a quieter and more hopeful one. Because if helplessness can be learned, agency can also be relearned. This does not happen through slogans or sudden motivation. It happens through small, credible experiences of influence. A task completed, a pattern interrupted, a boundary held, a question answered, a tiny moment in which action leads to result. These moments matter more than they seem. To an outside observer, they may look insignificant, but to a mind recovering from helplessness, they are evidence that the locked door may not be locked forever. Take a moment to imagine standing once again before that same door. This time, you reach for the handle without much expectation. But quietly, it turns. That moment is not dramatic, it is not loud, but it changes everything. Because once one door opens, the mind begins to update its map of reality. This is why environments matter so deeply. Supportive systems, responsive relationships, meaningful feedback, and realistic challenges can all help rebuild agency, not by pretending life is always controllable, but by restoring the crucial truth that some actions do matter. And that truth is psychologically life-giving. Learned helplessness also invites a broader reflection on modern life. Many people live inside systems so large and abstract that their influence feels distant. Bureaucracies, algorithms, institutions, economic structures. It can become easy to feel small, replaceable, and powerless. When outcomes feel disconnected from effort for too long, helplessness can begin to spread not only through individuals, but through entire cultures. This is one reason small acts of agency matter so much. Making one decision clearly, changing one routine, speaking one honest sentence, repairing one neglected corner of life. These are not trivial. They are psychological signals that the self still has reach. Imagine now a quiet room at dawn. The air is still. A window is slightly open. For a long time, the room felt sealed, but now, almost imperceptibly, fresh air begins to move through it. That is what recovering agency can feel like. Not dramatic transformation, just the return of movement. The human mind craves belonging, not merely for comfort or companionship, but because our brains evolved in complex social networks where cooperation, coordination, and harmony often determine survival. The quiet pull of belonging is subtle, pervasive, and powerful. It can shape thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without a single command or explicit instruction. It works not through authority, but through observation, expectation, and the silent rules of the group. This is the phenomenon psychologists call social conformity. Social conformity occurs when individuals adjust their beliefs, perceptions, or behaviors to align with the group. It is not always conscious. Often it is so seamless that people barely notice it happening. Yet the effects are profound. Entire cultures, institutions, trends, and ideologies are reinforced by this quiet human tendency. Take a moment to imagine sitting in a room. The chairs are arranged in rows. People around you whisper their opinions, nod, and gesture. A simple question is posed. Which line is the longest? The answer seems obvious. Yet, when everyone else begins pointing to a shorter line, something strange happens. The mind hesitates. Doubt creeps in. Even if you are certain of your perception, the pressure to conform can distort judgment. This is exactly what a series of famous experiments by psychologist Solomon Asch revealed. Participants were asked to make straightforward perceptual judgments, while others, confederates instructed by the experiment intentionally, chose the wrong answer. Even though the correct choice was clear, a significant proportion of participants gave the same incorrect response as the group. Why does this happen? The mind balances two powerful forces, accuracy and social acceptance. Being correct is valuable, but belonging is essential. In uncertain situations, or when stakes are subtle, the need to fit in can outweigh the desire to assert individual judgment. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. Humans are wired to live in groups. Cooperation, harmony, and avoidance of conflict historically enhance survival. Conformity is not limited to perception tasks. It extends into beliefs, moral judgments, consumer behavior, political opinions, and even memory. People will often recall events differently, adopt opinions they do not fully endorse, or adjust their moral evaluations simply to align with the group. Take a moment to visualize this. Imagine a river flowing through a forest. The current is strong. Branches, stones, and leaves are carried along. Some objects resist, wobbling against the flow. Most follow. The river is like society. Most thoughts, gestures, and behaviors drift with the flow of collective expectation. Only the rare or persistent elements resist. Psychologists have discovered that conformity is strongest under 3 conditions. First, when the group is unanimous. Second, when the task is ambiguous or difficult. And third, when group members are perceived as similar, respected, or important. This explains much of human behavior that appears irrational from the outside. People adopt habits, speak in certain ways, vote a certain way, and even accept scientific, political, or moral claims simply because the social environment suggests consensus. The mind experiences subtle pressure, not through commands, but through observation and expectation. Conformity is often invisible to those experiencing it. We rarely ask ourselves, am I thinking this because I believe it, or because I see everyone else doing so? The answer can quietly shape entire identities and worldviews, and yet there is a paradox. While conformity stabilizes social systems, it can suppress creativity, critical thinking, and moral courage. Many historical atrocities were amplified by widespread conformity, individuals quietly accepting norms, following trends, or failing to speak against collective errors. Imagine now a crowd standing in a plaza. Each person gazes toward a flagpole, unaware that some of them are looking at a different flag. Slowly, everyone begins to shift their gaze. Few resist. Those who do may feel isolated, anxious, or unsure. The power of the group subtly dictates an action, and action. This demonstrates the silent efficiency of social conformity. It shapes not only what people say or do, but how they see, remember, and interpret reality itself. Yet, conformity is not inherently harmful. It allows for coordinated action, social cohesion, and cultural learning. It allows humans to build cities, maintain institutions, and transmit knowledge across generations. Without some level of alignment, society would fracture. The challenge is awareness. Conformity becomes dangerous when the mind fails to distinguish between what is internally verified and what is externally imposed. Awareness of this tendency allows a person to act more deliberately, to notice when influence is shaping perception, and to maintain a subtle, reflective distance even within collective dynamics. Take a moment to reflect quietly. How many of your opinions, behaviors, or perceptions are truly your own? How often has the river of the group gently nudged you, without notice, toward alignment? Social conformity reminds us of the power and subtlety of human influence. It is a silent force, quiet but persistent, shaping individual cognition while weaving the fabric of collective reality. And in understanding it, there is a calm kind of insight, a recognition that the mind is not always fully independent, but that awareness, reflection, and gentle attention can help navigate the currents without being entirely swept away. The quiet lesson is this: conformity exists in all of us, not as a flaw, but as a feature. Awareness transforms it from an invisible constraint into a tool for careful participation. We can flow with society when needed, yet pause, resist, or redirect when integrity, curiosity, or truth demands it. Social conformity is not merely social psychology. It is a mirror to the human mind, a reminder that belonging shapes thought, perception, and memory in ways both subtle and profound. Every choice requires energy. Even small, seemingly trivial choices. A cup of coffee, the color of a shirt, the route to work consume mental resources. The human mind, remarkable as it is, has limits. It does not function with infinite clarity. Even the sharpest intellect can grow weary when forced to decide too often, too quickly, or under pressure. This gradual depletion of cognitive resources is what psychologists call decision fatigue. Decision fatigue is not laziness. It is a quiet, physiological reality. The prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and self-control, requires energy to function. Each decision, each evaluation of options, consumes glucose and mental focus. Over time, as choices accumulate, the mind's capacity to process, weigh consequences, and act with discernment declines. Take a moment to imagine a morning filled with options. Do you wake at 6 or 7? Which cereal will you eat? Which email will you respond to first? Which route will you take through traffic? Each choice is small. Each is manageable. But cumulatively, they add weight, and the mind, like a muscle, begins to tire. Research shows that decision fatigue can lead to predictable behaviors. People become more impulsive. They choose defaults. They avoid choices altogether. They may acquiesce to suggestions they would normally reject. Even moral judgment can degrade under prolonged decision-making. Judges, after a long morning of cases, are more likely to grant parole early in the day than late, not due to bias or intent, but because the constant effort of evaluating complex cases gradually depletes mental energy. This has profound implications. Decision fatigue is invisible until it is experienced. It shakes not only what we do, but who we become in subtle ways. Repeated minor choices can accumulate into larger patterns: impulsive purchases, skipped workouts, indulgent snacks, rash judgments, or postponement of important actions. Imagine now your mind as a battery. Each decision draws a small amount of charge. Small, almost imperceptible drains. At first it is unnoticed, but eventually the battery weakens. Each subsequent choice becomes harder. Errors creep in. Patience wanes. Motivation diminishes. Psychologists have found that decision fatigue can also interact with stress. When cognitive resources are low, the mind relies more on heuristics, mental shortcuts, to make choices. While heuristics are efficient, they are not always optimal. The quiet consequence is that under fatigue, even intelligent people can make decisions that are inconsistent with their long-term goals or values. Take a moment to visualize a forked path in a forest. Each turn requires thought. The longer you walk, the more your steps feel automatic. You may follow a path without noticing its direction. That is decision fatigue. It does not announce itself. It creeps into perception, reducing deliberation and subtly altering behavior. Even simple tasks become exhausting. Choosing what to wear, what to eat, or what to say can weigh disproportionately when mental energy is low. Some people make all major decisions early in the day to conserve cognitive resources for tasks that truly matter. A strategy quietly rooted in understanding the physiological nature of choice. Decision fatigue also interacts with emotion. As energy declines, emotional responses can intensify. Irritability rises. Frustration accumulates. Small annoyances become disproportionately bothersome. Social interactions become more challenging. Empathy and patience, which require mental effort, are quietly diminished. Consider the paradox. Freedom feels empowering, but unlimited choice can be exhausting. The modern world, with endless options at every turn, menace, subscriptions, news feeds, tasks, amplifies this effect. The mind is constantly engaged in evaluation, rarely resting. The very abundance that seems liberating can erode clarity, leading to suboptimal decisions, stress, and even regret. Psychology experiments highlight these effects. In studies involving shoppers, people presented with a large array of options often experience indecision, dissatisfaction, or impulsive purchases compared to those presented with fewer choices. This demonstrates a quiet but powerful truth. Too much choice can diminish satisfaction, not enhance it. Decision fatigue is not inevitable. Awareness, structuring choices, and conserving energy are protective. Habits, routines, and default options reduce the mental load of small decisions, preserving energy for the significant ones. Eating, sleeping, exercising, and stress management all influence how quickly decision fatigue sets in. Even brief periods of rest, meditation, or reflection can restore cognitive reserves, allowing more deliberate, thoughtful action. Take a moment to imagine a library filled with books. Each book represents a choice, a possibility, a path, a decision. At first, the mind eagerly explores, but as hours pass, the shelves blur. The books seem heavier. Each selection feels exhausting. That is the quiet reality of decision fatigue. But if you pause, step back, and organize the shelves, clarity returns. One can navigate the options without being overwhelmed. The most subtle aspect of decision fatigue is how it shapes identity. We often do not recognize the effect. We assume lapses in judgment are personal flaws or moral weaknesses. But often, they are simply the brain signaling that its resources are low, quietly urging pause and restoration. Decision fatigue also affects long-term planning. People under sustained cognitive load tend to defer important decisions, procrastinate, or favor immediate gratification over delayed rewards. Even the mind's ability to visualize complex futures can diminish under fatigue. This quiet erosion of foresight is one of the more insidious consequences of repeated choice under strain. Now imagine the mind at night after a day full of choices. The battery is low. The streams of thought feel slower. Emotions are more intense. Impulse feels stronger. And yet in this state, reflection can be gentle. Awareness of decision fatigue allows the mind to forgive errors, to recognize that suboptimal choices are not evidence of moral failure, but of natural limitation. It invites calm pacing, prioritization, and restoration. Decision fatigue reminds us of the delicate balance between autonomy and energy. Even the most capable, intelligent mind must manage its resources. Reflection, pause, and organization are not optional. They are essential for sustained clarity, thoughtful judgment, and well-being. The human mind is, in many ways, a pattern-seeking machine. From the moment we wake, we scan the world for repetition, symmetry, and structure. A face in a crowd, the rhythm of footsteps, the arrangement of leaves on a tree, or the cycles of day and night. Our brains instinctively detect order. This skill has kept humans alive for millennia. Detecting patterns allowed our ancestors to anticipate danger, track prey, and predict the behavior of others. It is a deeply calming and profoundly practical function of cognition. Pattern recognition, however, is not always accurate. The same mechanism that reveals truth can also generate illusions. The mind is eager to find order even when none exists, to detect meaning in randomness. Psychologists call this tendency apophenia, the perception of patterns or connections in unrelated data. While sometimes creative or insightful, it can also lead to errors, superstition, and misjudgment. Take a moment to imagine watching clouds move across the sky. Some shapes seem familiar and animal, a face, a geometric form. Your mind projects structure onto random formations. The clouds themselves are chaotic, yet your perception imposes order. This is both comforting and disorienting. It demonstrates how pattern recognition allows the mind to navigate complexity, but also illustrates its inherent subjectivity. In cognitive science, pattern recognition operates at multiple levels. Sensory perception allows us to notice visual, auditory, and tactile repetition. Memory enables us to compare present input to past experience. Reasoning allows us to extrapolate, predict, and connect seemingly unrelated events. Together, these processes allow humans to detect patterns in nature, mathematics, language, music, and social interactions. Consider music, for example. The brain recognizes rhythm, harmony, and melodic repetition almost instantaneously. Even without formal training, people detect recurring motifs, anticipate changes, and feel satisfaction when expectations are confirmed. This same mechanism underlies our enjoyment of symmetry in art and geometry, the delight of solving puzzles, and the comfort of predictable narrative structures. Pattern recognition is not purely passive. It shapes decision-making, problem-solving, and learning. The mind continuously evaluates whether a sequence of events or stimuli fits an existing pattern. When the fit is strong, it generates confidence, expectation, and predictive ability. When the fit is weak, the mind experiences uncertainty, curiosity, or discomfort. This subtle feedback loop guides attention, focus, and action. Yet, the mind's eagerness can lead to errors. In statistics and probability, humans are prone to seeing streaks, hot hands, or clusters in random sequences. A coin flipped 10 times may produce heads 5 times in a row purely by chance, yet the mind may perceive it as unusual or meaningful. Psychologists call this the gambler's fallacy, the belief that random events are self-correcting, or that patterns must exist in every sequence. Take a moment to imagine tossing a coin repeatedly. The first flip is easy to interpret. The second flip seems predictable. By the 5th or 6th, your mind searches for trends. By the 10th, you may assign significance to coincidences that are purely chance. This demonstrates the double-edged nature of pattern recognition. It is a source of intelligence, creativity, and adaptation. Yet it can also deceive, creating false connections, superstitions, and illusions of control. Pattern recognition is equally vital in mathematics. Humans naturally detect numerical relationships, geometric symmetry, and proportional structures. From the simple arithmetic sequences to the elegant spirals of the Fibonacci series, the mind experiences satisfaction when patterns emerge. This is not only a cognitive preference, it is a survival mechanism. Predictable patterns, whether in the natural environment or abstract thought, allow planning and informed action. But pattern recognition in mathematics also illustrates the tension between insight and error. People may see relationships where none exist, detect correlations in independent data, or extrapolate trends prematurely. These errors can lead to misconceptions, faulty predictions, or even entire false theories. And yet, this same sensitivity to structure allows for invention, discovery, and creativity in scientific and mathematical thought. In physics, pattern recognition is essential for interpreting phenomena. For example, when observing the motion of objects, scientists notice trajectories, forces, and relationships between variables. The same mind that perceives a falling apple as an isolated event can, through pattern recognition, derive the laws of motion. Even abstract concepts such as wave behavior or energy transfer become intelligible because the mind detects consistent patterns across observations. Take a moment to visualize waves on a calm lake. Each ripple is separate, yet collectively they follow rhythmic structures influenced by wind, current, and the shore. The mind perceives both individuality and continuity. This dual awareness allows prediction, understanding, and reflection. Pattern recognition is also foundational in social cognition. Humans detect behavioral regularities, emotional expressions, and social cues in others. By noticing repetition and association, people infer intentions, predict reactions, and navigate complex social environments. Misreading these patterns, however, can lead to misunderstanding, prejudice, or conflict. The same skill that allows empathy and cooperation can also foster stereotyping or false assumptions. Importantly, pattern recognition is enhanced by experience. The more exposure a mind has to particular domains, the more finely it can detect subtle regularities. Musicians perceive tonal variations that novices overlook. Chess masters anticipate strategies invisible to casual players. Scientists notice anomalies and consistencies that hint at deeper principles. This is a gentle reminder that knowledge and reflection train the mind to detect meaningful patterns more reliably. Yet even expertise does not eliminate error. The mind may overfit, creating complex explanations for simple phenomena or see trends where randomness prevails. Recognizing this tendency is essential for calm and reflective cognition. Awareness allows the mind to balance sensitivity with skepticism, intuition with verification. Take a moment to imagine a starry night. Each point of light seems scattered at random, but as your gaze lingers, constellations emerge. You trace lines, imagine figures, and discover connections. And yet, the stars themselves are indifferent. The constellations exist in perception, not in the sky. This is the essence of pattern recognition, a dialogue between mind and world, between perception and reality. It is a quiet force that guides thought, shapes learning, and frames experience. But it is also humble, reminding us that the mind's interpretation is not always absolute, that perception is filtered through expectation, prior knowledge, and cognitive bias. Pattern recognition is calming because it provides structure and predictability. It reassures the mind the world is not entirely chaotic. Even small consistencies, repetition in nature, sequences in language, rhythms in music anchor thought and perception. At the same time, it is unsettling because the mind may overreach, seeing order where there is none. And yet, the tension is productive. It fosters curiosity, inquiry, and reflection. When the mind detects a possible pattern, it investigates, tests, and refines. Mistakes become data. Coincidences become insight. Repetition becomes law. Consider the patterns in your own life, your routines, relationships, habits, and thoughts. Notice which patterns are meaningful and which are illusory. Recognize that your mind, for all its brilliance, is constantly seeking structure, weaving coherence from chaos. Pattern recognition is both a gift and a responsibility. It allows us to navigate the world, anticipate outcomes, and discover hidden relationships. But it also invites humility, reflection, and calm skepticism, and perhaps that is the most subtle beauty of this cognitive skill. It guides us, challenges us, and, when observed gently, teaches the mind to see the hidden structures of reality while remaining quietly aware of its own limitations. The mind often desires what is immediate. A sweet taste, a small reward, the instant approval of others all create a subtle yet powerful pull. From the moment we awaken, we are surrounded by stimuli that promise immediate satisfaction. The modern world amplifies this pull. Notifications, streaming content, instant messages, and readily available food, entertainment, and information. Yet, while immediate rewards are tempting, the mind also has the capacity to wait, to postpone gratification in pursuit of greater long-term outcomes. This capacity, psychologists call delayed gratification, and it is quietly central to human cognition, self-control, and achievement. Delayed gratification is the ability to resist a smaller immediate reward in favor of a larger future benefit. It is a form of mental discipline, a practice of patience, and a subtle exercise of executive function. At first, it feels unnatural. The brain is wired to respond quickly to stimuli. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, surges in anticipation of immediate pleasure. Yet, when the mind learns to hold back, to visualize future outcomes, and to maintain focus on long-term goals, it can achieve profound benefits across many domains: education, health, career, relationships, and even personal well-being. Take a moment to imagine a child sitting at a table with two treats in front of them. One candy is within reach. The other is visible but only obtainable if they wait quietly for several minutes. The temptation is immediate. The smaller reward is present, but the larger reward requires patience, control, and awareness of delayed consequence. Studies following children in such experiments found that those who resisted the immediate temptation often achieved higher academic performance, better emotional regulation, and stronger interpersonal skills later in life. This simple scenario illustrates a deep truth. The mind can anticipate, project, and choose to act in ways that benefit the future, even when the present calls loudly. Delayed gratification relies on several cognitive processes. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, decision-making, and self-control, plays a central role. It evaluates long-term consequences, weighs the benefits of patience against immediate pleasure, and mediates impulses generated in more primitive regions of the brain. It is as though the mind maintains a mental scale, continuously balancing desire against foresight. This delicate calculation, though often unconscious, shapes countless daily behaviors. Consider a financial analogy. Choosing to save money rather than spend it immediately mirrors the cognitive process of delayed gratification. Every small act of patience accumulates into a larger benefit. Interest compounds, investments grow, and future security increases. In psychology, this principle is mirrored in decisions about study, work, diet, and relationships. Each small act of restraint, though imperceptible in the moment, contributes to a cumulative effect over time. Delayed gratification is also deeply tied to visualization and imagination. The mind must construct the future, anticipate satisfaction, and evaluate it as more valuable than the present reward. This requires abstract thinking, emotional regulation, and the ability to maintain attention over time. Without a clear representation of future benefit, the impulse for immediate reward often wins. Visualization becomes a subtle tool of self-discipline, quietly strengthening the mind's capacity to wait. Take a moment to imagine standing before a glowing candle. You are told that if you wait, a second candle will appear, brighter and larger. The first candle is warm, comforting, and immediately gratifying. The second candle is invisible until it emerges, dependent entirely on your patience. Each second of waiting strengthens anticipation, reflection, and self-control. Each passing moment becomes a quiet test of focus, mental endurance, and awareness of delayed consequence. Delayed gratification also interacts with reward sensitivity. People vary in their natural ability to delay pleasure. Some have brains highly responsive to immediate reward signals, while others experience less intense impulses. Yet research shows that with practice, reflection, and supportive environments, almost anyone can strengthen their capacity for patience. The skill is cultivated, not simply innate. The consequences of failing to delay gratification are subtle but pervasive. Impulsivity can undermine long-term goals, create stress, and generate regret. Immediate rewards often carry hidden costs: overspending, poor nutrition, wasted time, and strained relationships. By contrast, successful delayed gratification enhances resilience, strategic thinking, and psychological well-being. The mind learns that patience is not merely waiting, but an active, reflective process that creates meaningful outcomes. Take a moment to consider a long road stretching before you. Each step feels uncertain. The destination is distant, not immediately visible. The terrain may be uneven, and the temptation to turn back or rest is strong, yet each step brings progress. However small, the farther you walk, the more visible the path's end becomes. That is the essence of delayed gratification, a subtle, continuous investment of attention, effort, and control in pursuit of something greater. Delayed gratification is also culturally and socially shaped. Societies that encourage planning, deferred rewards, and structured achievement provide environments that support this capacity. Conversely, environments dominated by unpredictability, scarcity, or immediate reinforcement can weaken the mind's ability to delay satisfaction. These patterns illustrate that delayed gratification is not only a personal skill, but also a reflection of environmental and social conditions. Even in physical health, delayed gratification plays a role. Choosing to exercise instead of resting, eating nutritious food instead of indulgent snacks, or following a treatment plan instead of seeking immediate relief all require the mind to anticipate long-term benefits over present comfort. The brain's reward systems respond to these choices with subtle reinforcement, gradually building habits that align with long-term goals. Consider mathematics as an analogy. Compounding processes, like exponential growth, demonstrate the power of patience. Small, repeated investments yield large returns over time. Delayed gratification operates on the same principle. The accumulation of small acts of restraint, self-control, and intentional decision-making leads to disproportionately larger benefits. Each choice is a unit of cognitive investment, building toward a greater psychological return. Take a moment to visualize planting a tree. You water it carefully, attend to its soil, and protect it from damage. The growth is slow. You cannot immediately see the full impact of your effort, but over months and years the tree flourishes, providing shade, fruit, and stability. The reward is delayed but profound. This quiet patience mirrors the psychological benefits of delayed gratification. The subtle beauty of delayed gratification is that it transforms the present experience. Waiting cultivates reflection, mindfulness, and perspective. The mind develops resilience against impulses, strengthens attention, and deepens awareness of consequence. It is not merely an act of restraint, but a form of mental training that enhances the mind's overall capacity for reflection, planning, and self-regulation. Take another moment to imagine sitting quietly in a dimly lit room. You resist the urge to act immediately. You reflect. You visualize the benefit that will come. You feel a calm anticipation, a quiet tension that is neither painful nor trivial. This is the mind practicing delayed gratification. Each moment of restraint strengthens awareness, patience, and cognitive control. Delayed gratification is a subtle, ongoing exercise of the mind's higher capacities. It requires attention, reflection, and the ability to prioritize abstract, future-oriented goals over immediate reward. And in this quiet exercise, the mind discovers not only the value of patience, but also the deep satisfaction that arises when effort, control, and foresight converge. We imagine that our perceptions, memories, and judgments reflect reality accurately, yet much of cognition operates in shadows hidden from awareness. This phenomenon, sometimes called perpetual blindness, refers to the persistent inability of the mind to notice patterns, errors, or contradictions, even when they are directly in front of us. It is not a single failure, but a continuous, layered process that quietly shapes experience, behavior, and understanding. Perpetual blindness is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not crash like a computer error or collapse like a misfired neuron. Instead, it weaves through perception and thought, creating blind spots that the individual rarely recognizes. The mind filters information automatically. It prioritizes, categorizes, and simplifies. These processes allow efficiency and focus, but they also obscure details, distort interpretations, and conceal inconsistencies. Take a moment to imagine walking down a crowded street. You notice faces, cars, signs. You navigate obstacles effortlessly, yet your attention is selective. Some details, though present, go completely unnoticed. Perhaps a person you have passed countless times carries a small object on their shoulder, or a bird lands in the exact same spot every morning. The mind simply ignores these patterns, not out of negligence, but because attention is limited. This selective invisibility applies to cognition itself. People often fail to notice inconsistencies between beliefs and behavior, between expectations and outcomes, or between cause and effect. The mind constructs narratives, not reality. It fills gaps, smooths rough edges, and prioritizes coherence over accuracy. Psychologists call this the coherence bias. It is comforting, yet it perpetuates blindness. In perceptual psychology, experiments such as change blindness demonstrate this vividly. Observers may fail to notice large alterations in a visual scene, even when these changes are striking. A tree disappears. A person shifts position. A color changes dramatically. And yet, for several seconds, the mind continues to perceive the scene as unchanged. This is not failure, it is efficiency. The mind assumes stability, filling in gaps rather than continuously re-evaluating the world. Perpetual blindness is also evident in social cognition. Humans tend to overlook bias in themselves while easily identifying it in others. Stereotypes, assumptions, and habitual interpretations operate quietly, guiding perception and judgment. The mind rarely flags its own errors because awareness itself consumes energy and requires reflection. This creates a persistent blind spot, the inability to fully see one's own cognitive limitations. Take a moment to visualize a dimly lit room. Shadows cover the corners. You move confidently, navigating around furniture, yet there are objects you cannot see, even though they are directly in your path. The mind is efficient but partial. It perceives enough to act, not enough to know everything. This is the essence of perpetual blindness, perception without full awareness. The phenomenon is not merely theoretical, it impacts daily life. People often overlook mistakes in reasoning, skip contradictory evidence, and fail to recognize flawed assumptions. Scientific errors, financial misjudgments, and interpersonal conflicts are frequently rooted in blind spots that persist despite repeated exposure or experience. The mind prefers coherence, even at the cost of missing crucial information. Perpetual blindness is amplified by expectation. The brain continuously predicts incoming stimuli based on prior knowledge. These predictions guide attention and interpretation. When reality deviates from expectation, the mind often ignores or rationalizes the difference rather than fully registering it. This predictive function is essential for efficiency. It allows rapid reaction, but it also produces systematic blindness to novelty or contradiction. Consider memory. Humans remember events in ways consistent with prior beliefs, often altering details unconsciously to maintain a coherent narrative. Memories of past experiences are reconstructed rather than retrieved perfectly. The mind is blind to its own reconstruction process. Each recall is a subtle edit, quietly adjusting perception of the past while reinforcing current interpretations. Even deliberate reflection is vulnerable. Awareness can increase, but only partially. Biases remain persistent. The mind tends to favor information that confirms expectations, overlooks anomalies, and fills gaps with plausible but inaccurate content. This creates a feedback loop. What is unseen reinforces what is already believed. Take a moment to imagine walking through a forest at dusk. Shadows shift. Patterns emerge in leaves and branches. Some are real, some imagined. Your mind selects what is significant, discards the rest, and constructs a narrative that feels complete. You walk confidently, unaware of details just beyond perception. Perpetual blindness operates in the same way, but not in scenery alone. It applies to thought, belief, and judgment. Perpetual blindness is also evident in reasoning. People often fail to recognize logical fallacies in their own arguments, even when they can easily identify them in others. Confirmation bias, availability bias, and anchoring bias all contribute to invisible errors in judgment. These cognitive tendencies are adaptive. They reduce mental effort and speed decision-making, but they create persistent blind spots that are rarely noticed. In problem-solving, the mind can become trapped by habitual strategies, unable to see alternatives even when solutions are present. Functional fixedness, a type of cognitive rigidity, illustrates this. A simple object may have multiple uses, but the mind perceives only the familiar function. This is a form of blindness created by efficiency and habit. Take a moment to consider a simple mathematical sequence. 1, 3, 5, 7. The pattern is obvious, yet subtle variations, skipped numbers, alternate sequences may go unnoticed if the mind is focused on expectation rather than observation. In this quiet oversight, perpetual blindness emerges. The mind interprets only what fits its current model, leaving anomalies invisible. Perpetual blindness is also emotional. People often overlook their own emotional states, failing to recognize subtle cues of stress, fatigue, or discomfort. Emotional awareness requires deliberate attention. Without it, moods, desires, and impulses quietly influence behavior, yet remain largely unseen. This hidden influence reinforces blind spots across cognition and decision-making. Even scientific observation is constrained by this principle. Researchers can collect enormous amounts of data, yet their attention, expectations, and biases shape what is noticed and what is ignored. Entire phenomena may go unobserved simply because they do not fit prevailing models or assumptions. Perpetual blindness is not a flaw of individuals alone. It is a structural feature of cognition, amplified by culture, training, and expectation. Take a moment to visualize the night sky. Thousands of stars shine, yet some are obscured by clouds, atmospheric distortion, or distance. Your eyes capture a fraction of the reality, and your mind interprets that fraction as complete. This mirrors perception and cognition. What is unseen is vast, yet the mind functions as though it is negligible. Awareness expands visibility but cannot eliminate blind spots entirely. Perpetual blindness is therefore both humbling and instructive. It reminds us that cognition is limited, that awareness is selective, and that certainty is often illusory. Yet it is also adaptive. The mind filters, simplifies, and prioritizes in order to function effectively. Awareness of this blindness is not a cure, but a reflective practice. It allows curiosity, skepticism, and gentle questioning to gradually illuminate hidden corners. Consider the blind spots in perception, memory, emotion, and reasoning. Recognize that the mind is constantly constructing reality, not merely recording it. Acknowledge the comfort and efficiency of these invisible processes while cultivating the subtle awareness to notice when something is overlooked. Perpetual blindness is not failure. It is a quiet, ongoing feature of human cognition. It challenges perception, encourages reflection, and fosters humility, and perhaps, in the stillness of awareness, the mind can glimpse what is hidden, observe patterns previously unseen, and learn to navigate both the visible and invisible layers of reality. How a choice is presented, its wording, its implications, its perceived consequences can dramatically alter judgment. Psychologists call this phenomenon moral framing. It is the subtle shaping of ethical decisions, not by changing the facts themselves, but by presenting them in ways that trigger different interpretations, emotions, and priorities. Moral framing is pervasive, quietly influencing behavior, reasoning, and even perception of truth. Take a moment to imagine two situations. In the first, a doctor must choose between a treatment that will save 90 people or a treatment that will fail in 10 cases. In the second, the doctor must choose between a treatment that will cause 10 deaths or a treatment that will succeed in 90 cases. The numerical outcomes are identical, yet studies show that people respond differently depending on how the information is framed, emphasizing lives saved or lives lost. This demonstrates how the mind is sensitive not only to facts, but to the moral and emotional context in which they are presented. Moral framing works because the human brain evaluates decisions through multiple, interacting pathways. The rational, analytical system calculates outcomes, probabilities, and rules. Simultaneously, the emotional system responds to harm, fairness, loyalty, and authority. Moral frames subtly bias these systems by highlighting certain aspects of a decision while downplaying others. The result is that the same objective situation can evoke entirely different moral judgments. Consider how language itself guides moral perception. Words like sacrifice, harm, benefit, or justice carry emotional weight that interacts with cognition. A single phrase can shift perception from acceptable to unacceptable, from permissible to forbidden. The mind, responding to these cues, may endorse or reject actions without deliberate analytical processing. This is neither inherently irrational nor unethical. It is simply how cognition integrates emotion, context, and reasoning. Take a moment to imagine reading a news story. Two headlines describe the same event. One emphasizes the heroism of the actor, the other the potential harm caused. Your judgment of the event changes based on which frame captures attention first. Moral framing operates silently in daily life, shaping decisions about politics, personal behavior, consumer choices, and social interactions. The famous trolley problem illustrates moral framing vividly. Imagine a runaway trolley heading toward 5 people. You can divert it, causing the death of one person instead. People's responses vary based on wording. Push a man to stop the trolley versus flip a switch to redirect the trolley. The numerical outcome is identical, but moral intuitions respond strongly to the framing. The mind reacts not only to consequences but to perceived action, responsibility, and emotional context. Moral framing also interacts with culture and personal values. Different societies prioritize harm, fairness, loyalty, authority, and purity in distinct ways. A frame that evokes strong moral judgment in one culture may be neutral or irrelevant in another. Personal experience, upbringing, and social environment shape sensitivity to specific frames. The same action can therefore be judged as virtuous, neutral, or wrong depending on context, demonstrating the fluidity of morality under cognitive framing. Consider the subtle power of default framing in daily life. People often comply with organ donation, retirement savings, or charitable contributions not because they are inherently persuaded, but because options are presented in ways that highlight norms, expectations, or social value. Default choices create moral frames that influence behavior without explicit reasoning. Awareness of these effects allows the mind to navigate choice more deliberately, reducing unconscious influence while maintaining ethical reflection. Take a moment to visualize a forked path. One path is labeled risk, the other protection. Both lead to the same destination, yet the labels influence perception, decision-making, and emotional response. Moral framing operates similarly. Context guides cognition, subtly shifting judgment, prioritization, and choice. Even in memory, moral framing shapes perception. Events recalled under one frame may be remembered differently if presented later with a new frame. A transgression may seem more severe when described with emotive language or less harmful when described neutrally. The mind reconstructs events, integrating context and framing into recollection, which influences future behavior and moral reasoning. In experimental psychology, moral framing demonstrates consistent effects across ages, backgrounds, and domains. Framing messages as gains or losses, as duties or rights, as harm or benefit, subtly shifts responses, even when subjects are aware of manipulation. This indicates that framing operates not merely as a superficial bias, but as a deep cognitive mechanism that organizes attention, emotion, and evaluation simultaneously. Take a moment to imagine a beam of light passing through a prism. The white light contains all wavelengths, but the prism divides it into a spectrum. Similarly, moral situations contain objective facts, but framing divides perception into distinct emotional and cognitive channels. Your response, like the separated colors, is influenced by the filter through which information passes. Awareness of the prism allows subtle control, but the effect of separation remains intrinsic to perception. Moral framing also interacts with narrative. Stories that emphasize harm, heroism, or sacrifice evoke strong moral responses, even when abstract statistics would suggest neutrality. Humans are narrative beings. The mind processes information more powerfully when it is embedded in context, emotion, and sequence rather than isolated facts. This narrative framing amplifies the influence of moral perception across social, political, and personal domains. Even physics and probability are subject to framing effects in cognition. Consider risk assessment. A medical procedure with a 1% chance of harm may be perceived as acceptable when framed as a 99% chance of success, but alarming when described as a 1% chance of death. The objective probabilities are identical, yet the framing shifts attention, emotional response, and moral evaluation. This demonstrates the pervasive influence of context on decision-making. Take a moment to imagine standing before two doors. One is labeled safety, the other danger. Both lead to the same room. Yet your initial emotional and cognitive response is shaped by the frame. Moral framing operates quietly in every choice. How actions, consequences, and obligations are presented shapes judgment as much as, or more than, the facts themselves. Moral framing also affects group behavior. Leaders, media, educators, and institutions influence collective action through subtle framing. Policies are accepted or rejected, behaviors adopted or rejected, behaviors adopted or ignored, and social norms reinforced based on how moral and ethical consequences are communicated. Awareness of these effects allows individuals to evaluate choices independently while still participating responsibly in shared social structures. Consider the choices you face daily. Notice how context, wording, and emphasis shape your perception of right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable. Recognize the subtle currents of moral framing that guide thought, emotion, and judgment. The mind is neither purely rational nor purely emotional. It is a dynamic integration of both, shaped by context, perception, and reflection. Moral framing is not manipulation. It is a fundamental property of cognition. It reminds us that perception and judgment are rarely objective in isolation. By observing, reflecting, and gently questioning framing, the mind cultivates ethical clarity, thoughtful decision-making, and awareness of the quiet influences that guide human behavior. And perhaps in the stillness of reflection, we can recognize that moral framing, while pervasive, also invites deliberate, conscious choice, a subtle training of awareness that allows the mind to navigate complex ethical landscapes with calm, clarity, and quiet insight. Priming effects are one of the most remarkable demonstrations of this phenomenon. In psychology, priming occurs when exposure to a stimulus such as a word, image, sound, or even a scent alters subsequent perception, thought, or behavior. The effect is quiet, almost invisible, yet it shapes cognition in ways that are pervasive, powerful, and sometimes unsettling. Take a moment to imagine walking into a room painted soft blue. You might feel calm, even serene, without consciously linking your emotional state to color. That is a simple form of priming. The environment subtly influences perception and mood. In more complex experiments, priming can affect moral judgment, social behavior, decision-making, and even memory. The mind absorbs information, integrates it, and responds, often before conscious awareness intervenes. Priming works because the brain organizes knowledge in networks. Concepts, experiences, and associations are interconnected. Exposure to one node activates related nodes, increasing their accessibility. For example, seeing the word doctor may prime related words like nurse, hospital, or medicine, and may even influence decision-making in medical contexts. This activation occurs automatically, reflecting the structure of memory and cognition rather than deliberate intention. Consider an experiment in which participants are asked to complete word fragments. Some are subtly exposed to words associated with age, such as retirement or grey. When later asked to walk down a hallway, those participants move slightly slower than a control group. Their behavior is unconsciously influenced by the prior exposure. The mind, though unaware of the manipulation, integrates the prime and expresses it subtly through action. Priming effects are also evident in social perception. People's judgments of others can be influenced by prior exposure to traits or categories. Reading words associated with honesty may increase trustworthiness in subsequent interactions, while exposure to words associated with hostility may increase suspicion. These effects illustrate how cognition is anticipatory, relational, and context-sensitive. Take a moment to visualize a line of dominoes. Each domino represents a thought, perception, or memory. A single pusher prime can ripple through the network, activating subsequent ideas and behaviors. The effect is quiet but cumulative. Even minor cues can have cascading consequences, shaping judgment and action in subtle ways. Priming also interacts with emotion. Exposure to positive or negative stimuli can alter mood, motivation, and engagement. Reading words associated with kindness can increase prosocial behavior. Seeing images of danger or threat can heighten vigilance. The brain's networks integrate sensory input with prior knowledge and emotional tone, producing outcomes that may feel spontaneous yet are quietly influenced by prior primes. Memory itself is sensitive to priming. Retrieval of information is facilitated by related cues. A subtle reminder can enhance recall, while an unrelated or misleading prime can distort memory. This principle underlies advertising, education, and cognitive therapy. By strategically exposing the mind to cues, behavior, and thought can be gently guided toward desired outcomes. Take a moment to imagine walking through a garden. The scent of jasmine primes relaxation. The sight of orderly rows of flowers primes attention to symmetry. A bird's song primes awareness of rhythm and timing. Each sensory cue subtly shifts cognition, illustrating how priming is woven into perception, experience, and thought. Priming effects also interact with decision-making. Exposure to certain concepts or environments can bias risk assessment, preference, or moral judgment. For instance, individuals primed with notions of cleanliness may exhibit increased ethical behavior, choosing honesty over deception in subsequent tasks. The effect is unconscious yet measurable, demonstrating the quiet but profound influence of prior context on choice. In experiments with numbers, priming influences estimation and numerical judgment. Participants exposed to higher numbers may unconsciously make larger estimates in unrelated tasks. Exposure to words suggesting speed or slowness can alter performance on timed tasks. These effects illustrate the brain's sensitivity to abstract cues, extending beyond sensory perception into conceptual processing. Take a moment to imagine a pendulum swinging. Each swing influences the next, not because of force alone, but because momentum carries the effect forward. Priming operates similarly in cognition. Early exposure to subtle cues sets the trajectory of thought and behavior, gently guiding the mind along a path that may not be consciously chosen, yet is coherent with prior influence. Priming is also context-dependent. The same stimulus can produce different effects depending on mood, environment, prior knowledge, and expectation. A neutral word may prime helpful behavior in one context, but aggression in another. The mind integrates multiple layers of information, and priming influences are therefore dynamic, interactive, and sometimes unpredictable. Even in language, priming operates silently. Word choice, sentence structure, and metaphorical framing can bias comprehension, memory, and emotional response. Reading a text framed around cooperation primes pro-social interpretation, while a text framed around competition primes vigilance or defensiveness. Language itself becomes a tool of subtle cognitive guidance. Take a moment to consider a river flowing over rocks. Each rock alters the current slightly, changing the direction, speed, and turbulence. Priming effects operate similarly. Minor cues influence the flow of thought, subtly altering decisions, perception, and action. The influence is not chaotic, but structured, following pathways of associative networks and cognitive patterns. Priming also affects creativity. Exposure to diverse, abstract, or surprising stimuli can increase the mind's ability to generate novel ideas. Conversely, repetitive, narrow, or restrictive priming can limit flexibility, producing rigid thought. The mind is both sensitive and plastic, capable of being nudged toward openness or restriction through subtle cues. Take a moment to imagine a gentle wind scattering seeds. The direction of the breeze guides where the seeds settle. Each seed carries potential growth, yet its path is influenced by invisible currents. Priming effects operate in a similar way. Subtle inputs guide mental exploration, shaping perception, memory, and action, quietly but profoundly. Priming also interacts with long-term learning. Repeated exposure to specific cues strengthens neural connections, creating habits, preferences, and patterns of thought. Education, therapy, and habit formation all rely on this principle. Over time, small primes accumulate into robust cognitive and behavioral tendencies, highlighting the cumulative power of subtle influence. Finally, priming illustrates the intertwined nature of unconscious and conscious cognition. While the mind can act deliberately, it is continuously guided by prior exposure, context, and subtle cues. Awareness of priming allows reflection, deliberate action, and strategic intervention, but does not eliminate its quiet influence. Consider the stimuli you have encountered today: words, images, sounds, smells. Notice how they may have influenced your thoughts, mood, and choices, often without conscious recognition. Priming effects reveal the mind as an intricate network, sensitive to context, timing, and association. Priming is neither manipulation nor magic. It is a fundamental property of cognition. By observing and reflecting on its effects, the mind can cultivate awareness, subtle control, and enhanced understanding of how thought, behavior, and perception unfold in response to the quiet cues that surround us. It is in this awareness, this gentle recognition of influence, that priming effects become not a source of worry, but a tool for insight, reflection, and mindful navigation of the world around us. Humans are not isolated beings. Even when alone, the mind remains attuned to emotional signals from the environment, other people, and even imagined scenarios. Emotional contagion is the subtle and often unconscious process by which feelings, joy, fear, sadness, or anger spread from one person to another. It is quiet, pervasive, and powerful, influencing thought, behavior, and physiology in ways that reveal the deeply social nature of human cognition. Take a moment to imagine walking into a room. Two individuals are engaged in conversation. One is visibly joyful, their face illuminated by a smile, their voice rhythmic and warm. The other appears tense, hunched, with furrowed brows and short, clipped sentences. Without thinking, your own mood shifts slightly in response. You may feel a subtle lightness or heaviness, a gentle pull in your posture, tone, or attention. This is emotional contagion, a silent transmission of affect, reflecting the mind's sensitivity to social signals. Emotional contagion occurs through multiple channels. Facial expressions, body language, voice intonation, and even physiological signals such as heart rate or breathing patterns contribute. Mirror neurons, which fire both when we perform an action and when we observe another performing it, play a central role in this process. Observing a smile activates neural circuits similar to those engaged when we smile ourselves. Observing distress triggers similar patterns of activation associated with empathy. These responses are automatic, blending perception, emotion, and action in a seamless, unconscious integration. Consider the ripple effect of laughter. A single person's laughter can cause others nearby to smile or chuckle, even without understanding the reason. Similarly, anxiety can spread silently in a room, altering posture, speech, and thought patterns of everyone present. The phenomenon demonstrates that emotion is not purely internal. It exists as a dynamic social force, transmitted through subtle cues, timing, and attention. Take a moment to imagine a gentle breeze moving through a field of grass. Each blade responds individually, yet collectively they sway in harmony. Emotional contagion operates in a similar way. Each individual's emotional state interacts with others, creating waves of affect that move through social networks. The result is often coherent, synchronized behavior and shared experience, even when the originating cause is distant or abstract. Emotional contagion also interacts with cognition. Feelings influence attention, memory, and reasoning. Fear heightens awareness of potential threat. Joy broadens attention and promotes creativity. Sadness deepens reflection and careful judgment. When emotions spread socially, they subtly shape group behavior, priorities, and decision-making. Awareness of contagion can help recognize why moods shift in collective contexts, from workplaces to communities to online spaces. Take a moment to visualize a single candle in a dark room. Its light illuminates the surrounding space. When a second candle is lit, the brightness spreads, overlapping and creating a more vibrant glow. Emotions operate similarly. One person's state can enhance or diminish the affective tone around them, creating collective moods that are stronger than individual contributions alone. Emotional contagion is not inherently positive or negative. Happiness can uplift, inspire, and encourage cooperation. Fear can warn, protect, and synchronize group action in times of danger. Anger can motivate justice or escalate conflict. The same mechanisms that transmit joy also carry anxiety, stress, or despair. The mind responds automatically, integrating signals, prioritizing social relevance, and adapting behavior accordingly. Physiological responses are part of the contagion process. Heart rate, skin conductance, and even subtle hormonal changes can synchronize across interacting individuals. Observing stress may increase cortisol in the observer. Observing calm can induce parasympathetic relaxation. The mind-body system is deeply intertwined, allowing emotional signals to propagate silently but powerfully. Take a moment to consider a wave in the ocean. The energy of a single disturbance travels outward, interacting with currents and obstacles, creating ripples that extend far beyond the original source. Emotional contagion functions similarly. One person's affective state creates ripples in social and cognitive networks, influencing thought, perception, and action in ways that are subtle yet persistent. Emotional contagion also interacts with language. Words carry not only semantic meaning but affective tone. Hearing phrases spoken with warmth, urgency, or sadness primes corresponding emotional responses. The brain processes these cues automatically, engaging mirror neuron circuits, empathy networks, and cognitive appraisal systems, producing an integrated response that feels immediate and natural. Consider the influence of storytelling. A narrative depicting fear, joy, or tragedy can transmit emotions across time and space. Readers or listeners experience physiological and cognitive responses similar to direct observation, demonstrating that emotional contagion extends beyond physical presence. The mind simulates others' experiences, integrating them into current emotional and cognitive states. Take a moment to imagine standing in a quiet forest. Birdsong, rustling leaves, and the gentle sound of flowing water subtly influence your mood. Each sound primes attention, perception, and affective state. Emotional contagion is not limited to human signals. It extends to the environment, media, and abstract representations, subtly shaping experience and thought. Social networks amplify emotional contagion. Online platforms, workplaces, and communities act as channels for emotional transmission. Posts, comments, images, and videos carry effective content that influences mood, perception, and decision-making. Often without awareness, collective emotion emerges, sometimes creating phenomena such as mass anxiety, viral happiness, or shared outrage. Take a moment to visualize a pendulum swinging. The motion of one pendulum, when coupled with others, can synchronize over time. Emotional states like pendulums resonate through social systems, creating patterns of alignment or conflict, coherence or disruption. This resonance highlights the subtle dynamics of affective contagion in human networks. Priming, empathy, and attention all interact with emotional contagion. Prior exposure to cues, personal sensitivity, and focus influence the degree and direction of transmission. Individuals vary in susceptibility, yet the effect is nearly universal. Awareness allows reflection and subtle modulation of one's own responses, but does not eliminate the underlying tendency for affect to propagate. Take a moment to consider a fire in a fireplace. The warmth and light naturally draw attention, influence mood, and subtly shift behavior. Emotional contagion operates similarly, with affective signals spreading quietly, influencing thought and action across individuals and groups. Even abstract representations, such as symbols, music, or color, can induce emotional contagion. A minor chord may evoke sadness, a major chord, joy. Dark tones in imagery may prime vigilance, light tones relaxation. These signals integrate with prior knowledge, social cues, and context to shape affective experience. Take a moment to imagine walking through a room where multiple people are engaged in different activities. Some are focused, others relaxed, some tense. Your mind subtly absorbs these cues. Posture, tone, gaze, and rhythm combine to produce a collective emotional field of which you are both observer and participant. Emotional contagion is the quiet mechanism that mediates this dynamic interplay, synchronizing individual experience with social context. Finally, emotional contagion illustrates the profound interdependence of humans. Our thoughts, moods, and behaviors are not purely self-contained. They emerge from interaction, observation, and subtle communication. Awareness of this process allows reflection, compassion, and deliberate cultivation of emotional tone in oneself and others. Notice how your own feelings shift in response to subtle signals around you. Recognize the silent transmission of affect, the quiet power of observation, and the interconnection of mind, body, and social environment. Emotional contagion reminds us that we are not isolated observers, but participants in a continuous, dynamic flow of affective energy. In this quiet recognition, the mind gains insight, resilience, and subtle control, understanding that emotions are both personal and social, immediate and transmitted, visible and hidden, shaping cognition and behavior in ways that are gentle, profound, and endlessly fascinating. The self is not as singular as it appears. At first glance, we imagine identity as a cohesive, continuous thread, one mind, one personality, one stable I. Yet psychological research reveals that identity is often more fragmented than we assume. Identity splitting is a phenomenon in which an individual's sense of self divides into multiple, sometimes conflicting patterns of thought, emotion, or behavior. This division can be subtle, unconscious, and persistent, quietly shaping perception, decision-making, and emotional life. Take a moment to imagine standing before a mirror. You see a single reflection, but it contains layers. Some aspects are familiar, predictable, and consistent. Others are hidden, contradictory, or fleeting. Identity splitting reflects this multiplicity. The mind harbors different selves that emerge under different contexts, emotional states, or social roles. Each self is coherent internally, but may conflict with other parts of the psyche. Awareness of these multiple layers is often incomplete, making the phenomenon largely unconscious. Identity splitting is evident in everyday life. Consider the way you behave at work, with friends, and with family. You are not exactly the same person in each situation. Different priorities, emotions, and social expectations bring forward different aspects of identity. One self is rational and focused, another playful and impulsive, yet another anxious or cautious. These cells interact, cooperate, or compete, influencing behavior without conscious recognition. Psychologists have explored extreme forms of identity splitting in disorders such as dissociative identity disorder, where distinct identities can emerge with different memories, preferences, and even physiological patterns, yet milder forms exist in everyone. Subtle compartmentalization allows humans to navigate complex social, emotional, and cognitive demands. The mind divides and allocates resources to maintain functionality, efficiency, and adaptability. Take a moment to imagine a prism splitting light. White light enters, and multiple colors emerge, each coherent, distinct, and real. The single beam is not lost. It has transformed into components that reveal structure hidden in the whole. Identity splitting operates similarly. A singular consciousness divides into multiple functional selves, each responding to specific environmental, emotional, or cognitive demands. These selves are not illusions, but emergent patterns of the mind's complex architecture. Memory plays a central role in identity splitting. Different selves may hold distinct recollections or emphasize different aspects of experiences. Conflicts arise when one self perceives an event differently than another, or when competing motivations clash. This fragmentation is not necessarily pathological. It can enhance flexibility, creativity, and problem-solving by allowing the mind to explore multiple perspectives simultaneously. Take a moment to imagine a river branching into streams. Each branch flows in a slightly different direction, yet all originate from the same source. Identity splitting operates in a similar manner. One stream may prioritize logic, another emotion, another social conformity. The branches interact, merge, or diverge depending on context, creating a complex and adapted network of selves that guide perception and behavior. The phenomenon also has profound implications for decision-making. Conflicting selves may influence choices in opposing ways. One part of the mind desires immediate gratification, while another prioritizes long-term benefit. One self seeks social approval, another values authenticity. The conscious experience may feel unified, but beneath awareness, multiple identities negotiate, compete, and subtly influence action. Recognizing these layers can lead to improved self-understanding and deliberate coordination of internal states. Take a moment to visualize a complex pattern of gears. Each gear rotates independently, yet all are interconnected. Some turn quickly, others slowly. Some exert force on others, some move passively. Identity splitting functions similarly. Multiple internal processes operate in parallel, shaping thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, while maintaining the appearance of unity. Awareness of this network allows insight into internal conflicts, motivations, and hidden potentials. Emotional identity is particularly susceptible to splitting. One self may experience intense fear or anxiety, while another appears calm or detached. Emotional responses can vary dramatically depending on context, prior experience, and present focus. This divergence is adaptive, allowing individuals to function across varied and unpredictable environments. Yet it also creates subtle tension as competing emotional cells vie for expression and influence over behavior. Cognitive identity can also fragment. Analytical thinking may coexist with intuitive judgments. Creative exploration may exist alongside habitual thought patterns. These multiple cognitive selves may produce apparent contradictions, indecision, or internal debate. Yet they also enhance mental flexibility, problem-solving, and adaptive reasoning, illustrating the functional benefits of splitting. Take a moment to imagine a neural network illuminated. Each node fires in response to different inputs, producing unique patterns of activation. Some nodes dominate in certain contexts, while others remain dormant. Identity splitting mirrors this neural architecture. The mind allocates attention, emotion, and thought to different networks depending on situational demands, producing distinct self-patterns that emerge dynamically. Social identity contributes further complexity. The self perceived by others can differ from internal experience. Multiple selves emerge depending on roles, expectations, and interactions. One self may emphasize conformity and cooperation, another individuality and assertion. This interplay between internal and external identity reinforces the multiplicity of the mind, shaping perception, motivation, and behavior across social contexts. Take a moment to visualize a city at night. Lights flicker in different buildings, each representing a distinct space, activity, or story. From a distance, the city appears cohesive, yet closer inspection reveals countless overlapping patterns and hidden dynamics. Identity splitting operates similarly. The mind contains overlapping selves, each active in different domains, producing a sense of unity while concealing complexity beneath the surface. Physical embodiment interacts with identity splitting as well. Posture, gesture, and physiological states can activate different self patterns. A confident stance may bring forward assertive aspects of identity, while a relaxed posture activates playful or reflective selves. The body and mind are intertwined, providing cues that guide which self emerges in a given moment. Take a moment to imagine a kaleidoscope turning. Patterns shift, recombine, and transform continuously. Each configuration is coherent, beautiful, and functional, yet transient. Identity splitting mirrors this dynamic. Selves emerge, interact, and dissolve depending on context, producing continuous but shifting patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. Identity splitting also has implications for creativity. Divergent selves can generate novel ideas, explore alternative strategies, and simulate multiple perspectives. Conflicting motivations, rather than creating dysfunction, can produce richer problem-solving and enhanced innovation. Awareness of these internal patterns allows for deliberate coordination, harnessing the potential of multiple selves for constructive outcomes. Take a moment to consider a flock of birds in flight. Each bird moves independently, yet the flock maintains coherence. Movements, direction, and formation emerge from the interaction of individual elements. Identity splitting is similar. Multiple selves operate in parallel, creating coherent behavior through dynamic interaction, even when underlying patterns differ. Finally, identity splitting invites reflection and mindfulness. By observing the multiplicity of self, one can cultivate awareness of internal conflicts, hidden motivations, and adaptive strengths. Recognizing the fluidity of identity allows the mind to navigate complex emotional, cognitive, and social landscapes with clarity, empathy, and deliberate choice. Consider the multiple selves within you: rational and emotional, assertive and reflective, social and private. Notice how they emerge, interact, and influence thought and action. Identity splitting is not fragmentation in a negative sense, but a quiet adaptive feature of the mind, offering flexibility, creativity, and insight. In stillness and reflection, the mind can observe its own multiplicity, integrate diverse selves, and navigate the complex terrain of consciousness with gentle awareness and profound understanding. Intelligence is one of the most studied yet misunderstood aspects of human cognition. At first glance, it seems straightforward. Intelligence is often equated with memory, speed of learning, or problem-solving ability. Yet psychological research and cognitive science reveal that intelligence is far more nuanced, dynamic, and context-dependent than popular myths suggest. Misconceptions about intelligence shape self-perception, learning, and even social interaction, quietly influencing how the mind approaches challenges, curiosity, and growth. Take a moment to imagine a vast landscape. Some areas are flat and easily traversable, representing skills that seem immediately accessible. Others are rugged hills or deep valleys, reflecting abilities that require persistence, strategy, or creativity to navigate. Intelligence is not a single measurable quantity. It is a complex terrain of capacities, interactions, and adaptability, shaped by both biology and experience. One of the most persistent myths is that intelligence is fixed. Many people believe that you are born with a certain number of brain points which cannot change. Yet decades of research in neuroplasticity demonstrate that the brain continuously reorganizes itself in response to experience, learning, and practice. Neural pathways strengthen, new connections form, and abilities can expand throughout life. Intelligence is therefore dynamic, an emergent property of active engagement with the world, not a predetermined constant. Another common myth is that intelligence equals academic knowledge or test scores. Standardized measures such as IQ tests capture specific skills like pattern recognition, logic, or vocabulary. While useful in certain contexts, they do not encompass creativity, emotional reasoning, practical problem solving, or social intelligence. The mind's capacities are multidimensional. Intelligence manifests in adaptive thinking, innovation, insight, and the ability to navigate complex social and environmental challenges. Take a moment to visualize a prism splitting white light into a spectrum of colors. Each color represents a different type of cognitive ability: analytical reasoning, spatial awareness, emotional insight, memory, intuition, and creative thinking. Measuring only one dimension provides an incomplete picture. True intelligence is the integrated spectrum, a balance of diverse abilities that interact, amplify, and complement one another. A related myth is that speed of thinking equates to intelligence. Quick responses may reflect fluency in familiar domains, yet deep reasoning, reflection, and insight often require slower, deliberate thought. The mind is not merely a processing machine. It is an adaptive system that balances rapid perception with measured analysis, intuition with logic. Complex problems often require patience and sustained focus rather than immediate answers. Take a moment to imagine a river meandering through a landscape. A fast-flowing stream may seem impressive, yet a slow, steady current can carve deep valleys and create fertile ground for growth. Similarly, intelligence is not always about speed. It is about depth, adaptability, and the ability to integrate multiple perspectives over time. Another widespread myth is that intelligence is purely individual. In reality, cognition is deeply social. Ideas, problem-solving strategies, and knowledge emerge in collaboration with others. Collective intelligence, shared understanding within groups, can exceed individual capacity. Even in solitary thought, prior social learning, cultural knowledge, and environmental context shape the mind's abilities. Intelligence is therefore both personal and relational, extending beyond the confines of the individual brain. Take a moment to visualize a neural network. Each node represents a concept, skill, or memory. Connections are reinforced by experience, practice, and context. The strength of these connections determines the ability to retrieve, apply, and integrate knowledge. Intelligence emerges not from isolated nodes, but from the dynamic interplay of networks, reflecting flexibility, connectivity, and depth of understanding. Another myth is that intelligence is always logical or rational. Humans often rely on heuristics, intuition, and emotional judgment. These processes are adaptive, allowing rapid decision-making in uncertain environments. Emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, interpret, and regulate emotions in oneself and others, is equally vital to adaptive cognition. A mind skilled in reasoning but blind to social and emotional cues is limited in its ability to navigate real-world challenges. Take a moment to imagine balancing on a tightrope. Cognitive skills, social insight, and emotional regulation are all required to maintain stability. Neglecting one aspect can compromise overall performance. True intelligence integrates multiple faculties, balancing logic, emotion, creativity, and practical wisdom. Creativity is often underestimated in discussions of intelligence, yet creative thinking, producing novel solutions, seeing connections others miss, and imagining alternatives is a central facet of adaptive cognition. Many individuals with average standardized scores exhibit extraordinary creativity, demonstrating that intelligence cannot be captured fully by conventional measures alone. Another myth is that intelligence is fixed early in life. While early development is crucial, growth and learning occur throughout adulthood. Lifelong learning, curiosity, and engagement with challenging tasks continue to enhance cognitive capacities. Neuroplasticity allows the mind to adapt to new environments, learn languages, develop skills, and even recover from injury, underscoring the dynamic nature of intelligence. Take a moment to visualize a forest growing over decades. Some trees grow quickly, others slowly, yet the forest develops as a complex, interdependent system. Intelligence similarly evolves over time, shaped by effort, experience, and environment. Growth is nonlinear, sometimes subtle and often imperceptible, yet cumulative and profound. Another persistent myth is that intelligence is universally beneficial in all contexts. High analytical skill may not guarantee ethical judgment, emotional resilience, or social harmony. Wisdom, adaptability, and judgment complement raw cognitive capacity. True intelligence encompasses the ability to navigate complexity with insight, empathy, and ethical awareness. Take a moment to imagine a symphony orchestra. Each instrument represents a distinct cognitive skill or capacity. Individually, each contributes a unique sound. Together, orchestrated harmoniously, they produce a rich and powerful performance. Intelligence, like music, is integrative, diverse capacities combined create outcomes far greater than the sum of individual abilities. Finally, consider the myth that intelligence can be measured by a single number. Attempts to reduce human cognition to a single metric ignore the complexity, adaptability, and multidimensionality of the mind. Intelligence is emergent, context-sensitive, and relational. It thrives in networks, adapts to challenge, and integrates emotion, reasoning, creativity, and social perception. Recognizing these nuances allows for a richer understanding of self, others, and the subtle potentials of cognition. Notice how your mind navigates knowledge, problem-solving, social interactions, and creative insight. Recognize the layers of intelligence that operate consciously and unconsciously, in isolation and in interaction. Intelligence is not a fixed point, a score, or a simple attribute. It is a dynamic, emergent property of experience, reflection, and adaptation. In this awareness, the mind cultivates humility, curiosity, and resilience, embracing intelligence as both profound and quietly transformative. Subconscious learning is the quiet process by which knowledge, skills, and patterns are acquired without deliberate effort or active attention. Unlike deliberate practice, which requires focus and intention, subconscious learning occurs continuously, subtly shaping perception, memory, decision-making, and behavior. The phenomenon reveals the depth and adaptability of human cognition, demonstrating that the mind processes far more than we consciously recognize. Take a moment to imagine sitting in a quiet room, listening to soft music while reading a book. Your conscious attention may be on the text, but your mind absorbs patterns from the music, the rhythm of language, and even the subtle movement of your surroundings. Over time, these unnoticed stimuli influence thought, creativity, and emotional regulation. Subconscious learning integrates sensory input, prior knowledge, and context into networks that can be accessed later, often spontaneously or when prompted. One of the most compelling examples of subconscious learning is language acquisition. Infants learn the structure, rhythm, and meaning of language without formal instruction. They pick up grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary through exposure, imitation, and subtle reinforcement. This learning occurs largely beneath conscious awareness, relying on pattern recognition, repetition, and contextual cues. Even in adulthood, subconscious exposure to language, music, or symbols can shape fluency, comprehension, and expression over time. Take a moment to visualize a network of pathways in a forest. Some trails are well-trodden, representing knowledge accessed frequently. Others are hidden, emerging only after repeated exposure. Subconscious learning operates in this manner. Repeated exposure strengthens pathways, making them more accessible while leaving less obvious connections available for later integration. These hidden trails form the foundation for insight, intuition, and adaptive decision-making. Subconscious learning is not limited to perception or memory. It extends to motor skills and habits. Riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, or playing a musical instrument are all supported by learning that moves from conscious effort to automatic execution. Neural pathways consolidate practice over time, allowing actions to occur efficiently without active thought. This process conserves cognitive resources while enabling rapid, precise performance. Take a moment to imagine a river carving a canyon over centuries. The water flows continuously, gradually shaping the rock through persistent, subtle force. Subconscious learning operates in a similar manner. Small repeated exposures gradually reshape neural networks, producing enduring knowledge and skill without conscious intervention. Priming, which we explored earlier, is intimately connected with subconscious learning. Exposure to concepts, cues, or environmental patterns can prepare the mind to respond more effectively in the future. Subtle repetitions, even unnoticed, create anticipatory activation in neural networks, allowing faster recognition, recall, or application when circumstances demand. The mind quietly integrates these influences, forming patterns that emerge at optimal moments. Take a moment to visualize a pendulum swinging in a quiet room. Even if your attention drifts, the pendulum's rhythm is absorbed by your senses. Over time, your perception of timing, motion, or coordination aligns with the pattern. Subconscious learning functions in this way, integrating repetitive stimuli into internalized understanding, enhancing coordination between perception, cognition, and action. Memory consolidation during sleep is a key mechanism of subconscious learning. During various stages of sleep, the brain reorganizes and strengthens neural connections, integrating new experiences into existing knowledge. Dreams, though often fragmented, reflect this process, facilitating problem-solving, emotional processing, and skill enhancement. Even when information is not actively rehearsed, the brain engages in quiet integration, solidifying learning without conscious effort. Take a moment to imagine a soft fog rolling over a landscape. Contours are slowly revealed as light interacts with the mist. Subconscious learning operates similarly. Hidden connections gradually emerge, integrating past exposure with present insight, creating a coherent understanding over time. Subconscious learning also interacts with pattern recognition. The mind detects regularities in sequences, events, or relationships without explicit awareness. This ability allows humans to anticipate outcomes, identify anomalies, and make decisions based on implicit understanding. Complex skills, from mathematics to music to social intuition, rely heavily on this form of learning, which operates quietly beneath conscious observation. Take a moment to visualize a neural network. Nodes and connections are continuously strengthened by repeated exposure. Some pathways activate frequently, creating dominant patterns. Others remain latent, emerging when specific triggers or contexts arise. Subconscious learning strengthens this dynamic network, allowing flexible, adaptive cognition that feels intuitive rather than learned. Emotional states influence subconscious learning. Positive, relaxed states enhance absorption of patterns, creativity, and problem-solving. Stress or distraction can inhibit integration, reducing the efficiency of learning. The mind's receptivity fluctuates with attention, arousal, and emotional context, subtly guiding the effectiveness of subconscious processing. Take a moment to imagine walking along a winding path in a forest. Leaves rustle, birds call, light shifts. Each detail is absorbed unconsciously: sounds, movements, spatial patterns. Later, these experiences influence memory, judgment, and perception, often appearing as intuition or spontaneous insight. The mind continuously encodes information, even when conscious focus is elsewhere. Subconscious learning also facilitates skill transfer. Patterns learned in one context can emerge in another, often unexpectedly. Musical rhythm may improve coordination in sports. Spatial awareness in video games may enhance navigation in physical environments. The mind generalizes and integrates knowledge across domains, building versatile cognitive resources without conscious instruction. Take a moment to visualize a network of streams merging into a river. Each small tributary carries knowledge, experience, or pattern. Together, they form a flowing system capable of responding dynamically to obstacles, direction changes, and environmental challenges. Subconscious learning operates in this way, creating a flexible and adaptive mental network. Priming effects, identity splitting, and emotional contagion all interact with subconscious learning. Exposure to cues, activation of multiple selves, and the transmission of affective states influence how the mind absorbs and integrates information. The unconscious mind synthesizes these inputs, producing subtle changes in perception, behavior, and decision-making over time. Take a moment to consider a sand dune shifting with the wind. Grains move imperceptibly, yet over time, the shape evolves dramatically. Subconscious learning functions similarly. Small repeated influences accumulate into lasting patterns of cognition and behavior, reshaping the mind without conscious awareness. Subconscious learning is not limited to passive absorption. It also interacts with deliberate practice. Conscious focus reinforces patterns, while subconscious integration ensures automaticity and long-term retention. Together, conscious and subconscious processes form a continuous loop of learning, adaptation, and refinement, supporting skill, knowledge, and insight across diverse domains. Take a moment to imagine sunlight filtering through tree branches. Each beam illuminates different leaves, patterns, and textures. Subconscious learning allows the mind to perceive connections and relationships that were not explicitly studied, revealing insight in unexpected moments. Finally, subconscious learning emphasizes the quiet power of indirect experience. Exposure to ideas, behaviors, or patterns in low-pressure, low-stress contexts enables internalization and future application. Awareness of this process can enhance skill acquisition, creativity, and adaptive reasoning while reducing anxiety associated with formal instruction or performance. Notice the information, patterns, and experiences that have subtly shaped your thoughts, skills, and intuition. Recognize the quiet, ongoing work of your mind in integrating exposure, context, and repetition. Subconscious learning is not passive. It is an active, continuous process, a fundamental aspect of cognition that allows the brain to adapt, grow, and navigate complexity with gentle, hidden efficiency. In the stillness of reflection, the mind can observe the gradual unfolding of knowledge, appreciate the integration of conscious and subconscious learning, and recognize the quiet, transformative potential of experiences absorbed beyond awareness. The mind is a machine of expectation. Every moment, it predicts what will happen next, based on past experience, sensory input, and learned patterns. This predictive processing allows humans to navigate the world efficiently, anticipating outcomes, minimizing effort, and optimizing behavior. Yet predictions are not always accurate. When reality diverges from expectation, the mind experiences a prediction error, subtle, often unconscious signal that the anticipated and the actual do not align. These discrepancies are not failures, they are critical opportunities for learning, adaptation, and cognitive growth. Take a moment to imagine walking along a familiar path. You anticipate the next step, expecting the ground to be level, the light consistent, the environment predictable. Suddenly a small stone shifts underfoot, or a branch brushes unexpectedly against your shoulder. The surprise triggers attention, engages corrective action, and prompts the mind to update its internal model of the environment. This is a prediction error, the quiet mechanism by which the mind refines understanding, strengthens learning, and adjusts behavior to better match reality. Prediction errors operate across multiple domains: sensory perception, cognition, emotion, and social interaction. The brain constantly compares expectations to incoming data. If something deviates, a subtle signal is generated, prompting revision of internal models. For instance, in visual perception, the mind may predict the trajectory of a moving object. When the object's motion differs, the prediction error triggers recalibration, allowing more accurate tracking and anticipation in the future. Take a moment to visualize a pendulum swinging. Your mind anticipates its path based on prior oscillations. If an external gust of air shifts the motion, your brain registers a prediction error, prompting adjustment in focus, attention, and motor coordination. This dynamic interplay between expectation and reality underlies learning at every level, from basic perception to complex reasoning. In higher cognition, prediction errors are central to problem solving and creativity. When outcomes defy expectation, the mind experiences surprise, curiosity, or cognitive dissonance. These states motivate exploration, testing of alternative strategies, and refinement of mental models. Intelligence, in this sense, thrives on the detection and integration of prediction errors. Without them, cognition would stagnate, locked in habitual patterns unable to adapt. Take a moment to imagine a river encountering a boulder. The water cannot continue in the expected straight path. It diverts, forms eddies, and reshapes its course. Similarly, prediction errors redirect thought, prompting the mind to explore alternative pathways, correct assumptions, and integrate new information. The errors themselves are neither failures nor flaws. They are the signals that drive learning and adaptive behavior. Emotional prediction errors are equally impactful. Expecting approval, acceptance, or safety and encountering disapproval, rejection, or threat produces effective responses, surprise, frustration, or fear. These emotional signals guide attention, memory, and future decision-making. They highlight discrepancies between internal expectations and external realities, allowing the mind to adjust both perception and behavior for survival and social cohesion. Take a moment to visualize a delicate balanced scale. You place weights on either side, expecting equilibrium. When the scale tips unexpectedly, you adjust, shifting weights and recalibrating. Prediction errors function similarly in the emotional and cognitive domains. They provide feedback that allows internal models to better align with the complex, unpredictable environment. In learning and skill acquisition, prediction errors are indispensable. Consider a musician practicing scales or a mathematician solving equations. Each attempt generates subtle signals of deviation from the intended outcome. The mind uses these errors to correct technique, refine precision, and internalize patterns, gradually reducing discrepancies and improving mastery. Over time, repeated exposure and error detection lead to automaticity and intuitive expertise, demonstrating the quiet power of predictive feedback. Take a moment to imagine a neural network illuminated in dim light. Each connection represents a learned pattern or expectation. Prediction errors highlight areas where activity diverges from expectation, reinforcing pathways, pruning ineffective connections, and strengthening the coherence of the network. Learning, adaptation, and skill emerge from this continuous interplay between expectation and reality. Prediction errors also guide social cognition. When others behave differently than anticipated, expressing unexpected emotions, opinions, or actions, the mind registers subtle discrepancies. These errors influence empathy, perspective-taking, and adaptive social strategies. They help individuals navigate complex social environments, predict behavior, and adjust communication, enhancing cooperation and reducing conflict. Take a moment to visualize a flock of birds in flight. One bird. Visualize a flock of birds in flight. One bird veers off course unexpectedly. The flock adjusts, maintaining cohesion while incorporating the deviation. Similarly, the mind integrates prediction errors to adapt behavior, recalibrate expectations, and maintain alignment with the dynamic environment. Social intelligence depends on this continuous feedback mechanism. Errors in prediction are not merely corrective, they are creative. Surprises trigger curiosity, exploration, and novel solutions. Scientific discovery, artistic innovation, and technological invention often arise from the recognition of deviation from expectation. When results defy assumption, the mind must reconcile the difference, producing insight, reframing understanding, and expanding conceptual horizons. Take a moment to imagine a kaleidoscope turning slowly. Each rotation produces unexpected patterns, deviating from previous designs. The mind perceives these changes, learns from them, and integrates them into a richer understanding of possible configurations. Prediction errors operate similarly. By revealing divergence, they expand cognitive flexibility, imagination, and insight. Physiological responses accompany prediction errors. Subtle increases in heart rate, shifts in attention, and heightened sensory processing occur when outcomes differ from expectation. These responses enhance learning and adaptation, directing resources to areas of discrepancy. The body and mind work in tandem, using error as a signal for calibration and growth. Take a moment to visualize waves on a quiet lake disturbed by a falling leaf. Ripples radiate outward, altering the surface temporarily. Prediction errors operate in a similar way. A small divergence in expectation propagates through neural and cognitive networks, prompting adjustment and refinement. Over time, these subtle signals accumulate into significant learning, improved accuracy, and adaptive insight. Prediction errors are central to metacognition, the awareness of one's own thought processes. By noticing when predictions fail, the mind can reflect, plan, and adjust strategies. Awareness of error fosters humility, curiosity, and resilience, allowing the individual to approach problems, social situations, and personal growth with flexibility and openness. Take a moment to imagine a compass needle slightly off from true north. Each deviation is detected, corrected, and recalibrated. Prediction errors function as this internal compass, quietly guiding the mind toward alignment with reality. The process is iterative, continuous, and essential for adaptive intelligence. Finally, consider that prediction errors are not uniform. Some are subtle and easily integrated. Others are dramatic, provoking surprise, doubt, or emotional upheaval. Both types contribute to learning and adaptation. The quiet, ongoing errors help refine expectations, while larger deviations challenge assumptions, inspire creativity, and expand understanding. Notice how your mind anticipates, predicts, and responds to the world. Recognize the subtle signals when expectation and reality diverge, and appreciate the quiet power of prediction errors to refine perception, cognition, and behavior. These errors are not flaws. They are the fundamental mechanisms through which the brain learns, adapts, and grows, revealing the intricate, dynamic, and deeply intelligent nature of the human mind. In stillness, the mind can observe the delicate interplay of expectation, error, and adaptation, cultivating insight, resilience, and subtle mastery over both thought and behavior. At any given moment, humans interpret the world through internal frameworks called mental models. These models are simplified representations of complex systems, events, or relationships, allowing the brain to predict outcomes, make decisions, and solve problems efficiently. Mental models are not perfect copies of reality. They are practical tools, abstractions that help navigate uncertainty and complexity. Understanding these models and how they shape thought can quietly transform cognition, learning, and perception. Take a moment to imagine holding a transparent globe. Inside, intricate networks of lines, nodes, and connections represent patterns of cause and effect. You rotate it, exploring relationships from different angles. Mental models function similarly. They allow the mind to organize experience, anticipate consequences, and plan action, while simplifying overwhelming complexity into manageable frameworks. One of the most powerful aspects of mental models is their predictive capacity. The brain constantly uses them to anticipate outcomes in familiar and novel situations. For instance, when driving, a mental model of traffic flow allows you to predict the movement of other vehicles, pedestrians, and signals. Even when conditions are unfamiliar, the model provides a foundation for estimation, adaptation, and rapid response. Take a moment to visualize a bridge built over a winding river. The bridge provides a clear path across, connecting two sides safely and efficiently. Mental models function in a similar way. They span gaps in understanding, providing pathways to reasoning, insight, and problem-solving. The mind relies on these structures to avoid becoming lost in complexity, enabling adaptive navigation of both familiar and new challenges. Mental models are central to decision-making. Each model encapsulates assumptions, beliefs, and learned patterns, guiding attention and shaping choices. When applied accurately, they enhance efficiency and clarity. When flawed or incomplete, they can mislead, producing cognitive biases, errors, or misconceptions. The interplay between accuracy and utility defines the quiet power of mental models. They are both tools for understanding and potential sources of misjudgment. Take a moment to imagine a map of a city. Some streets are accurately drawn. Others are missing or simplified. Travelers rely on the map to navigate efficiently, yet must adapt when reality diverges from the model. Mental models operate in the same way. They provide guidance while requiring adjustment and refinement through experience and reflection. Learning and expertise develop through the refinement of mental models. Novices begin with incomplete or oversimplified representations. As experience accumulates, models become richer, more flexible, and more accurate, Experts in any domain, whether science, art, or social interaction, maintain sophisticated models that allow rapid interpretation, anticipation, and problem-solving. These models integrate diverse inputs, from sensory perception to abstract reasoning, and continuously update with feedback from the environment. Take a moment to visualize a neural network. Each connection represents a component of a mental model, a rule, a pattern, or an expectation. With repeated experience, connections strengthen, forming integrated structures that support reasoning, intuition, and adaptive thought. Mental models are living networks, evolving with experience, insight, and reflection. Mental models also interact with cognitive biases. Assumptions embedded within models influence attention, perception, and memory. Confirmation bias, for example, arises when a model leads the mind to prioritize information that supports existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. Similarly, availability bias can cause the mind to overweight recent or vivid experiences when applying a model. Awareness of these tendencies allows subtle correction, refinement, and calibration of mental frameworks. Take a moment to imagine adjusting the lenses of binoculars. Shifting focus clarifies details while maintaining the broader perspective. Mental models operate similarly by refining components, updating assumptions, and integrating new information. The mind enhances both accuracy and utility, balancing detail and context. Social cognition relies heavily on mental models. Understanding other people, predicting behavior, interpreting emotion, anticipating intentions requires internal frameworks that approximate their perspectives and motivations. These social models, sometimes called theory of mind, allow empathy, cooperation, and effective communication. Errors in these models, however, can lead to misunderstanding, misjudgment, and conflict. Awareness of the limits and biases inherent in social mental models fosters clarity, adaptability, and subtle insight into interpersonal dynamics. Take a moment to imagine a chessboard. Each piece, move, and potential response is represented in a mental simulation. Players construct models of the opponent's strategy, adapting their own responses in real time. Mental models provide both foresight and flexibility, allowing rapid adjustment as the game evolves. In life, the mind engages in analogous simulations, using models to navigate complex environments, anticipate consequences, and optimize outcomes. Emotional mental models also exist. Individuals develop internal representations of emotional experiences, regulatory strategies, and response patterns. These models guide awareness, interpretation, and regulation of emotion in both self and others. Emotional mental models interact with cognitive frameworks, producing integrated decision-making, adaptive responses, and nuanced social perception. Take a moment to visualize a flowing river with multiple channels. Some channels carry calm, reflective water. Others rush turbulently. Each represents a mental model. Some stable, others fluid. The mind navigates these channels, drawing on different models depending on context, experience, and need. Flexibility in switching between models allows adaptive cognition, creative problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Mental models also shape perception of risk, reward, and probability. Individuals construct internal representations of likelihood and consequence, which guide attention, decision-making, and behavior. Miscalibrated models can lead to overconfidence, avoidance, or misjudgment. Accurate models integrate statistical reasoning, experience, and context, enabling precise estimation and adaptive choice. Take a moment to imagine a compass navigating uncharted terrain. The compass provides orientation, while continuous observation of surroundings allows adjustment. Mental models function in a similar way. They provide structure, guidance, and predictive capacity, yet require ongoing refinement through feedback and reflection. Creativity and innovation are enhanced by flexible mental models. When existing frameworks are insufficient, the mind can combine, modify, or create new models, generating novel insight and adaptive solutions. Divergent thinking often arises from the ability to perceive gaps, contradictions, or alternative structures within current mental models, producing inventive and unexpected outcomes. Take a moment to visualize a kaleidoscope slowly rotating. Patterns shift and recombine, creating new configurations. Mental models are like these patterns, flexible, dynamic, and capable of integrating diverse elements into coherent understanding. Awareness of this flexibility allows the mind to leverage models creatively, adapting them to novel situations with subtle insight. Memory consolidation also interacts with mental models. New experiences are interpreted and integrated through existing frameworks. Prediction errors, as discussed earlier, highlight discrepancies between expectation and outcome, prompting refinement of models. Over time, the interplay between memory, prediction, and model adjustment enhances cognition, problem-solving, and adaptive behavior. Take a moment to imagine a tree with deeply rooted branches. The roots represent foundational models, stable assumptions, and core principles. Branches grow, adapt, and reach toward new experiences. Mental models operate similarly. They are rooted in core knowledge, yet flexible and adaptive, responding to experience, feedback, and insight. Finally, mental models encourage metacognition, the awareness of one's own thinking. By observing assumptions, identifying biases, and reflecting on frameworks, the mind can refine models deliberately. This process enhances learning, decision-making, and emotional regulation, fostering a subtle yet profound understanding of oneself and the world. Visualize the mental models you carry, the frameworks that shape perception, guide action, and organize understanding. Notice their strengths, limitations, and fluidity. Recognize the quiet, continuous work of the mind in refining, updating, and integrating these frameworks. Mental models are not static. They are living representations, guiding cognition, enhancing adaptability, and revealing the subtle architecture of thought in a calm, reflective, and deeply insightful way. Consciousness is rarely fixed. At any given moment, awareness flows, shifts, and drifts across thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. Consciousness drift is the gentle, often unnoticed movement of attention and self-awareness across mental landscapes. It occurs when focus wanders, when the mind drifts from one idea to another, or when awareness fluctuates between sensory input, internal reflection, and imagined scenarios. Far from being a flaw or distraction, this drifting process plays a crucial role in creativity, problem-solving, learning, and emotional integration. Take a moment to imagine a calm river flowing through a forest. The surface is smooth in some places, reflecting the sky clearly, while ripples and currents shift the reflection elsewhere. Consciousness operates in a similar way. Sometimes it is sharply focused, other times fluid, meandering gently across streams of thought. This drift allows connections to form between disparate ideas, linking memory, perception, and insight in subtle, productive ways. One of the key functions of consciousness drift is creative incubation. When the mind is not strictly focused, subconscious processing continues in the background. Ideas, patterns, and solutions emerge quietly, often unexpectedly. The drifting mind integrates prior knowledge, experiences, and observations, producing insight that may feel sudden or serendipitous. Many creative breakthroughs in science, art, and problem-solving occur during periods when attention is not rigidly directed, highlighting the quiet power of mental wandering. Take a moment to visualize a candle flame flickering in a dark room. Its light sways, revealing shadows in new patterns with every subtle movement. Consciousness drift operates similarly. The mind explores shadows of thought, illuminating connections that are not immediately obvious. This shifting perspective is both calming and intellectually fertile, providing space for reflection, synthesis, and subtle discovery. Consciousness drift also plays a role in memory consolidation. As the mind moves between focused attention and wandering thought, neural networks associated with recent experiences are strengthened and reorganized. Connections are reinforced, patterns are integrated, and understanding deepens. During sleep, this process continues, allowing subconscious integration of knowledge and insight. Even while awake, gentle drift supports the quiet organization of thought, enhancing both recall and comprehension. Take a moment to imagine leaves floating along a slow-moving stream. Each leaf represents a thought or memory, drifting in relation to others. interacting, sometimes converging, sometimes separating. The mind operates in a similar way. Attention flows naturally, sometimes lingering, sometimes moving on, enabling a subtle weaving of experience and knowledge into coherent patterns. Mind wandering, a form of consciousness drift, has been studied extensively in cognitive science. Researchers have observed that spontaneous thought, daydreaming, and reflective wandering activate networks in the brain associated with memory, planning, and creativity. This default mode network supports the generation of scenarios, rehearsal of solutions, and exploration of internal landscapes. Consciousness drift is not idle. It is a dynamic, adaptive process that fosters understanding, creativity, and problem-solving. Take a moment to visualize a soft breeze moving through tall grass. Individual blades sway, creating patterns that shift constantly. Consciousness drifts similarly. Attention moves subtly between topics, emotions, and memories, forming new patterns of understanding and insight with each gentle motion. Emotional processing is deeply influenced by consciousness drift. When awareness moves through thoughts and experiences, it allows the mind to integrate feelings, reassess interpretations, and gain perspective. Rather than suppressing or controlling emotion, gentle drift provides space for reflection, emotional regulation, and subtle insight into the sources and dynamics of affective states. Take a moment to imagine a prism catching sunlight. The light splits into a spectrum, each color representing different aspects of perception, memory, and emotion. Consciousness drift allows the mind to explore each color in turn, noticing subtle variations and relationships. By observing this spectrum, thought and feeling can be understood as interconnected patterns rather than isolated events. Decision-making is influenced by consciousness drift as well. The mind continuously evaluates options, anticipates outcomes, and integrates past experiences. Drift provides mental space for simulation and rehearsal, allowing alternative possibilities to emerge and informing more nuanced, adaptive choices. Far from being distraction, the subtle flow of awareness enhances strategic thinking and flexible reasoning. Take a moment to visualize clouds moving across a wide sky. Some clouds drift slowly, some quickly, overlapping and separating. Consciousness operates similarly. Thoughts and attention shift fluidly, forming temporary configurations that reveal patterns and possibilities not accessible through rigid focus. This dynamic is essential for both intuitive insight and deliberate problem-solving. The interplay between focused attention and drift is critical. While focused attention allows precision, clarity, and immediate action, consciousness drift supports integration, synthesis, and creative recombination of knowledge. Alternating between these states or maintaining a gentle balance optimizes learning, adaptation, and emotional understanding. Take a moment to imagine a spider weaving its web. Each strand is carefully placed, yet the web grows through iterative adjustments, responding to the environment. Consciousness drift allows the mind to weave connections across experiences and ideas, forming subtle networks of insight that strengthen over time. The process is iterative, quiet, and profoundly effective. Subconscious processing is intimately connected with drift. Even when attention appears disengaged, the mind continues to detect patterns, evaluate probabilities, and integrate information. Drift provides the context for this background processing, allowing insight to emerge spontaneously or when attention is redirected. Take a moment to visualize a lantern swinging gently in a dark cave. Its light touches new surfaces with each swing, revealing hidden contours and textures. Consciousness drift illuminates hidden relationships in thought, emotion, and perception, revealing patterns that are often unnoticed during rigid focus. This illumination supports adaptive understanding, creativity, and emotional integration. Mind wandering also enhances problem-solving in novel contexts. By allowing the mind to explore unconventional associations, consciousness drift facilitates analogical reasoning, flexible strategy development, and innovative synthesis. Many scientific, mathematical, and artistic breakthroughs arise from this quiet exploration, often during moments of reflection, meditation, or even light distraction. Take a moment to imagine a ripple spreading across a still pond. Each ripple interacts with others, producing interference patterns, convergence, and divergence. Consciousness drift functions similarly. Ideas, memories, and insights interact subtly, forming emergent patterns of understanding that can be accessed intentionally or spontaneously. Cultural and social contexts shape the content and direction of consciousness drift. Experiences, norms, and learned associations influence the pathways attention follows during wandering thought. Awareness of these influences allows subtle calibration, enhancing reflection, creativity, and adaptive cognition, while reducing unhelpful biases or repetitive loops. Take a moment to imagine a gentle snowfall covering a quiet landscape. Each flake lands softly, adding to a growing intricate pattern. Consciousness drift accumulates subtle observations, experiences, and reflections, forming coherent mental structures that influence perception, behavior, and understanding over time. Finally, consciousness drift is deeply meditative and calming when observed intentionally. By noticing the movement of thought without judgment, the mind cultivates awareness, presence, and insight. This gentle observation enhances metacognition, emotional regulation, and adaptive flexibility, fostering both intellectual and emotional growth. Take a final moment to reflect. Visualize your awareness flowing like a quiet stream, drifting between thoughts, sensations, and memories. Notice the subtle interactions, patterns, and connections forming as attention moves. Consciousness drift is not aimless. It is a foundational process of cognition, creativity, and emotional integration. By observing and embracing this quiet movement, the mind enhances understanding, insight, and adaptability, revealing the subtle architecture of thought in a reflective, gentle, and profoundly calming way.